I'd like to call to order our famous Saturday budget meeting that we all are really happy to be here. You know, one for this, we could be home watching NCAA basketball, but, you know, there it is. We have a busy schedule, and so my plea to all of us and all the presenters is that discussion and your points are focused and concise, and we'll ask the same way with the answers. And if a question's been asked and answered, please just don't ask it again. We're all paying attention so we can get that, and we'll try to keep on schedule. There's, as you know, I'm sure by now, there's coffee next door. There will be lunch served, and I'll then turn it over to Joe to make some opening remarks. One final comment, if I may. I'm going to ask Jack to call this meeting to order.
FinCom has a quorum. I call the meeting to order, effective immediately.
Thank you, Jack. As I was mentioning to a few of you coming in, I think the process is today we'll try to get as much information as we can so we feel comfortable that we know what the issues are in terms of the budget. We have it on our selectmen's meeting agenda for tomorrow to discuss it, to follow up this meeting.
We're coming back tomorrow again?
Monday, rather.
Yeah.
Thank you, Doug. And I'm hoping then that the week following we'll be in a position to vote on the budget. We'll move from there. So, Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Chairman, members of Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, Department heads, and all those present. Today marks 58 days before Moderator Ford will gavel town meeting to order. And so the clock is ticking, and we now turn the focus from the budget message from February to working with, from the administration standpoint and Board of Selectmen standpoint, working with our co-equal partners in government of town meeting, with an effort to get this operating budget, which is a balanced budget at this point, before town meeting and successfully through town meeting. The budget that you're going to debate today and throughout the month of March, hopefully, increased year over year by a mere 1/3 of 1%. That was because we were struggling with a deficit of $1.8 million. And to meet the challenge of that deficit, cuts have been made across several departments, impacting several programs. These were difficult cuts made through difficult choices, which I hope, however, lead today to difficult but frank and necessary conversations. You'll see in the budget message that there are several departments that were impacted more than others. None more so than Department of Public Works. And I've put in a conversation piece in there, if you will, regarding a discussion about the transfer station and the hours of operation. The cuts that I've recommended in this level funded budget impact upon services, so you'll hear from department heads directly today, because I've asked them to offer to you their, again, frank commentary on what this budget does to their programs, to their constituencies, and to the community at large. And I talk about difficult conversations because I think it's necessary and proper for us to have difficult conversations today and throughout the month of March, because I know we all have a unified goal of going in as one team and as one town to town meeting 58 days from today. And so as you move through this process today, I'm very hopeful that we will move towards progress and that unified goal at town meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Joe. First on our agenda is the police. So, Chief and Deputy Chief, thanks for being here, and I'll turn the floor to you.
Mr. Chairs and members of the boards and committees, I'm Chief Dave Gilmet, Chief of the Harwich Police Department. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm sure we will meet soon. And this is Deputy Chief Kevin Considine with me. I have to start off, as I do every year, by thanking you for participating in this process with us and basically sacrificing your Saturday here and coming out and reviewing the budgets with all the department heads. So thank you for your support of the police department over the years. and your guidance on this difficult budget issue that we face every year. And I'd also like to thank the interim town administrator, Joe Powers, and finance director, Carol Ola, for their large amount of help and guidance on this budget that we finally arrived at this morning. It was very valuable assistance from them. And a very, very big thank you to Deputy Chief Kevin Considine, who did the large majority of the work, along with Kate Barley, who was in our budget every day, paying bills, doing payroll. And these two probably, Kate and Kevin, probably have the most institutional knowledge of this budget within the department at this point. So very, very extremely valuable, and I appreciate their help. Their help. Just by way of leading in, I didn't know how you wanted to proceed, but just as a little introduction, I wanted to do a quick rundown as to how we arrived here with the police department budget. And it was along with all the other departments. It started obviously when we looked at putting together a draft budget for FY21, and then we would meet with the interim town administrator and the finance director and review that draft budget. We knew going in that this draft budget was going to be, that spending on it was going to be scrutinized highly. We knew that was the issue, so Kevin and Kate combed through both the salaries and wages side and the expense side intently, and made a number of reductions and within the budget prior to us sitting down with Joe and Carol and going through the draft. That budget that we sat down with originally had a 4.7% increase to it. So the following department head meeting, we were instructed to that we were going to have to hold to the 2% spending, and that we were to produce a budget memo that would name the cuts that we would have to make to hold to the 2% line and the potential impact of those cuts. Deputy Chief Considine and Kate then sat down again and ended up cutting, which was what our number ended up being for our budget to 2%, was $116,000. Now, as you might imagine, $116,000 is not easy to come by even in a budget our size, because 86, I think, % of our budget is salaries and wages, and the increase was due solely to 3 collective bargaining agreements that were settled this past year that resulted in 2% increases across the board, plus some adjustments. So that was, there were no other increases. The expense budget, even in that 4.71 version, was in the negative. So we had to start with a large chunk, and we ended up deciding on a cruiser. We had put in for 2 cruisers. We decided with one at $55,000, started from there, and then cut the other, was it $61,000 from a small piece from salaries and wages, and the rest in expenses. And those cuts were laid out in that memo, and it was presented to the finance director and the interim town administrator, who then decided shortly after that to restore some of those items, one of them being the cruiser, and some items in overtime that we had cut as a result of having to reach the 116, which were overtime items specifically directed towards like large events, public safety coverage for large events. So that's where we stand at this point. We have had that restored, and I truly appreciate the support on that. The cuts that were made totaled $43,000 for us at this point, and the majority of them are out of our expense side. Now, I want to also mention, and Carol can back me up on this, if you're used to doing it the way we used to, which is looking at the Munis report, which is starts on page 240, on the proposed budget document, there are problems with that munis report. The projected actual column is wrong. Those numbers came from somewhere else, and therefore the percentage change numbers on the far right are also wrong. So if you look at page 240, and our first line item, which is part-time year-round salaries and wages, that page reads 49.41% increase. It's actually a 38.46% decrease. So did you get the packet that we had presented yesterday at Town Hall that says Harwich Police FY20 actual compared current FY21 with cuts, this document? Okay. So if everybody has this document, I suggest you can certainly look for the detail within the munis report, because the wording within the munis report is correct, but the only column that is correct on the munis report is the town admin column. That is a correct number for the budget, for that line item. So if we could just run down this sheet, and then if you had any questions, I think that'd probably be the quickest way to go. Okay. So as you can see, we just start with salaries and wages. The part-time wages reduced 38%. Overall, salaries and wages are up 4.6. That is, as I alluded to already, a direct result of settling the collective bargaining agreements at 2% plus all three unions. So that's how we arrive at that 4.6. And then, of course, we had to make we try and offset as much as we could out of the expense side, and you'll see that there are very limited increases in the expense side, and the expenses came in at -8%. And you'll see in the difference column there, that's the dollar figure number that represents that percentage change from FY20 to FY21. So in other words, that difference column includes the cuts that Kevin and Kate made originally to our original draft budget, and it also includes the town administrator cuts that got us to the ultimate 3.4% increase overall for our budget. So, considering the time, you can see the line items there and the percentage increase or decrease. We'll certainly attempt to answer any questions you have resulting from that sheet, or anything in the munis report, or actually anything at all. If I can't answer it, Kevin will.
Okay. I'll open up the questions. Jack, let's go to you guys first.
Our newest member, would you like to start?
I'm all set, thank you. I was just curious, Chief, my name is Brian Wiener. I'm new, so you got to forgive me. But I was curious how you were able to make the reductions on part-time wages to such a dramatic level. How will that impact the town?
Okay, those are, there's two categories within those cuts. It's the special police officers and a part-time office assistant. That part-time office assistant line has helped us cover vacations for our records clerk. And it actually used to fund an entire part-time office assistant, but we tried to take that money and get an IT person several years back, and that didn't work. So we donated $20,000 out of that line to the cause, and didn't see it again, and towards the IT program, which is still a problem for us. But so it doesn't have a huge impact, other than potentially not being able to cover the vacation hours of our records clerk. But we did leave money in the line for that.
So the reduction in special officers, I'm especially curious because I've been coming here now for 32 years. I live in town. I remember when I was much younger, and there was always a presence of special officers in the summertime.
Right.
And that presence has disappeared.
Right.
Does that adversely impact the safety of the community and also the comfort and attractiveness of the community to visitors?
I wouldn't say. I think the special officer reduction you see in departments across the board and it's been more of a liability issue and a training issue. Our special officers, we have 7, but the majority of them work mostly just traffic details, which is privately paid. They will occasionally, like, we called them out during the tornado incident, but there's very, very rare circumstances. One is very busy with a lot of our road race and special events, and sets up our signs and everything, but we don't have them on the street on a regular basis. So I correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but I think Kate and Kevin looked at that line, and they looked at a history of actual spending on like that one special officer who is the busiest, and that's where they found the money to cut.
Thank you.
Mr. Troy?
Thank you, Chief, for your budget and Assistant Chief. Just a couple quick questions. The cruisers, one is being covered by your budget, and then one is being covered by free cash?
Right.
So you're still getting 2
Yes.
cruisers somewhere? Okay.
Yes.
And then the other question is, what is your current, I see your current staffing levels. How many officers are out right now on disability?
On
How does that
disability,
affect your overtime?
well, there's none on disability. We have, there's one in the academy, so that's an opening that's been filled, and we're paying, but we're not realizing the benefits of that officer yet. And then we have another police officer opening as a result of a disability retirement. So that's an opening that we're hoping to fill after July 1st. And then we just had a full-time dispatcher resign and go to Barnstable PD. So we actually have 3 openings, 2 police officers and 1 dispatcher at this point. So that's actually not bad compared to what I've seen in the past. I think one year I sat here and told you at one point we were down 6. A department with a sworn strength of 35.
I couldn't remember what your, in the past, but I was just curious what the current vacancies are. Now, is that hiring position for July, is that affected, Joe, by the hiring freeze that you've temporarily implemented, or?
It was not removed from the budget, however, there is still a hiring freeze in place, meaning we wouldn't be bringing anyone in the fiscal year 20 until the freeze is lifted.
Bless you.
There's funding in fiscal year 21, and it's really going to be determined by the outcome of this process.
But with the temporary hiring freeze in place, and I think you had a February date that had to be being
Correct.
advertised by a certain date.
Any open requisitions that were funded in fiscal year 20 that were not advertised by February 6th have not been filled and are not in the process yet of being filled.
Is this affected, that police officer affected by that February 6th? So it's not even being advertised then, is that correct?
We did not make the advertisement date set, so right now, we're not moving forward on that until
Okay.
this.
Because I know it takes a considerable amount of time to find an officer, right? And to train him, and,
Yes,
And
from
what-
advertising to the time they're on the streets, about a year.
right. And so if we delay this process another 4 or 5 months, I mean, it's just delaying and filling that rec by the hiring freeze. Just asking the question, that's all. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Lamantia?
I'm fine, thank you.
Mr. Sherry?
No, it's a great report. Thank you very much, Chief. And people who are watching, hopefully, simple things in the budget like the elections that they don't consider. You guys have to man the elections, so we got a presidential election coming up. You got to plan for that. We just had a primary. There's a lot of extra things in the budget. They don't realize what's going up, and I think your numbers are great. I really do.
Thank you. Mr. Torek?
In terms of the, other than personal service expenses, there's 2 categories that constitute close to 90% of the reduction. Purchase services and supplies. Can you tell me what the composition is of those reductions?
Yeah. So can you give me the number? So what do we get?
It's, other purchase services
Yeah,
went
five-
down by
five three.
$21,130, and supplies by $21,235.
Yeah.
Do you know what the composition is of those numbers?
Yeah. All right, so we've got 3,800 of that was previously, 3,800 previously budgeted, and the last budget was for college reimbursement plan, and nobody took part in that this year. There was some cameras removed. Other items related to removed line painting. Do you have anything else on that?
No, the biggest item was the college potential reimbursement, and there is none anticipated for FY '21, which is a huge savings in '21.
Sometimes it's like items that, I don't have them noted here, but sometimes there's items that are put in that are a one-time need, and they're purchased, you know, in the previous fiscal year, and then that obviously is not needed in that line. That did occur a few times, according to Kate, my conversation with Kate. And what's the other one? Other supplies? I know that's a big catch-all, the 55800.
Then the public works supplies, that was parking tickets and citations, which, knowing what we were gonna face this year, we had enough to kind of stockpile a little for parking citations, which are used by the rec department as well, and we pay those. Those are used all summer, so we have probably a good 2 years of stock of those available.
And the other supplies, like, for example, besides that, there were, in the previous budget, there were some fairly large ticket items like training pistols that fire ammunition, a rifle and a training pistol, or 2 training pistols. Those were taken out and not, you know, put into that line this year. Yeah.
Some of these reductions were partially one-shots?
Right,
Okay,
yeah. So, which is a benefit to us.
thank you.
Mr. Kennedy?
Yeah, thank you, Chief. I'm sure taking 8% out of your operating expenses is not an easy thing to do. But when I look at a line item, 43% medical or related, went down 43%. Does that put any of your team at risk, or the public, or what exactly is that?
No, there was a good amount that we were gonna purchase 2 AEDs that were fairly expensive, and Kevin looked at it, and our ultimate plan was to get AEDs in every cruiser. Right now, they're in every marked cruiser.
Correct.
Do you wanna comment on that anymore?
Yeah, so that's our AED replacement, the bulk of that, which right now an AED for heart attacks, defibrillator is in every marked cruiser on the road. Right now, there's none in detectives' vehicles or admin vehicles. My goal in the future is to get those in every single vehicle. But those are built so well, and with our warranty plan, we're good. I felt comfortable cutting those 2 this year.
Thank you.
Chief, I get a lot of comments from people around town about the number of vehicles that, one, are sitting down in the hollow and sometimes out front. Can you talk a little bit about the cruisers and why they're there and so on, just to help people understand?
Well, that's right in the deputy's wheelhouse, because he provided you with that was part of the documentation,
Yes.
right? So in the additional documentation that we provided, there's a whole rundown on each cruiser that we own, who's assigned to it, what its purpose is, and I'll let you take it from there.
So, as a lieutenant in this meeting for a number of years prior to this role, that question comes up every year. So, from my notes last year, sitting in back, I came up with those 2 sheets that you should have. One is a police fleet breakdown, which goes over exactly each car we have by number, and whether, number 1, who they're assigned to, or number 1, where they're used on patrol. And you'll see in that document that under marked patrol vehicles, there's 12, 5 of which are patrol sector cars, and in the summer, we could have 5 vehicles out there on the road being used. This time of year, you're right, there may be a couple vehicles sitting down there at the slow time of year, but I can assure you that in the busy time of year, we're often looking for vehicles to use. So I can definitely go over more if anybody has any questions, but in that vehicle breakdown, I put the cruiser numbers, who they're assigned to, or what function they're assigned to, and on the fleet miles and projections document, again, I broke down it by unit numbers, the current miles as of last month, the projected annual miles, and projected miles this July and next July. And this is the document I use to see, okay, if we get 2 vehicles, which 2 are gonna be replaced this year and next year? We're always kind of ahead 2 years on that.
Good. I'm all set.
Thank you. Art,
I just ask a quick question on that.
sure.
Isn't that a reflection of the type of town that we are, which is a vacation? I mean, a town that doesn't have people gravitating toward it in the summertime would have a very definitive number of vehicles they'd need, and they'd probably be used all the time, right? I mean, it'd be a constant basis. But here, it's a situation where we have the population go up to, what, 40-some-odd thousand in the summer, and the necessity is then to use those vehicles, right?
Correct. And one other thing that's important that I kept out that's in that document is there's 3, 1 marked and 2 unmarked, with very high mileage down back over to the animal control vehicle side that are there. Those are vehicles registered to the emergency management department that are authorized to have 3 vehicles under their department. Just like we do with other town departments, and Kyle and I work very close together to move vehicles down, whether it's over to this parking lot or to emergency management. So those 3 that are down back, 3 of those are registered to emergency management. Fortunately, we're able to use those, whether for details or other functions, but 3 of those are not ours, they're emergency management.
Thanks, Cal.
Thank you.
Steve, other questions?
No, a lot of good questions from our colleagues on the Finance Committee, some of which I had, but I just have to say that, like every other department, you folks in the police department have responded, and Joe and Carol made this point to me right away, made the kind of cuts that were asked for, even though they were somewhat draconian relative to the services you have to provide. So I want to thank you for that. I think that what Joe and Carol have restored reflects the need there. I did have a chance to talk with the chief yesterday about the budget and, sort of the logic behind all the things that took place. But they were ready to take the $116,000 cut. And I think we're going to find that that's true of every department that comes before us here today. Everybody has joined together here to try to address what has been a major issue for all of us this budget. And a challenge for Joe and Carol. So I just want to thank you for the work you did.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to take the same tack Stephen just did, actually. We're at a place where nobody's taking any great joy in the cuts, and this is just, it's not just to the police department, it's to everybody. The underlying problem is that we embarked on sewering the town. People opened up their tax bills in January and got sticker shock. So while it's not just all relative to operations, we got to be able to find a way to get some sort of relief to the taxpayers so that we can move forward as best we can to finish the other things we need to do. So I know we're all appreciative of the efforts that went into everybody cutting their budgets. It wasn't because we're having a good time doing it. It's and we expect in the budget presentations, rather than me arguing the budget back up from my perspective, I'm waiting for somebody to make a coherent and urgent plea for a particular thing that would kill them in their job performance if it stayed the way it is. Lacking that, I'm really today not really interested in building the budget back up again, given where we are, because we were upside down by nearly $2 million, and the fact that we're going to be able to get through this without an override is really the important issue.
Michael?
Yep, thank you both. Just 2 clarifications. The police cruisers, 1 free cash, 1 budget. I'd asked a question a minute ago to Joe, and he said both budgets, so I just want to make sure it's 1 and 1. 1 and 1. And then,
Well, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
There's 2.
2
cruisers.
Yep.
They're both in the operating budget. One of is being funded by, other revenue, which could be taxes, right? The other is being funded by free cash.
okay, thank you. And then just on the hiring freeze, both of those positions, if I remember correctly, were filled when the hiring freeze was put on. So I don't believe, in my own opinion, and this probably isn't the forum to talk about that, that those jobs would be affected by the hiring freeze. Gabby was still employed as dispatcher when the hiring freeze went on, and the patrolman was still being paid. And the money is in the FY20 budget and the 2021 budget, correct?
Correct.
So why would they have to wait to hire those positions?
The quick and simple answer is to get through this exercise. And I've said it before and I'll say it again to be clear, the unilateral decision that I made to implement the hiring freeze was to see whether or not that this exercise would result in layoffs. And if they resulted in layoffs, that those impacted employees, wherever they may be, have first opportunity to get into positions. So I would be willing to not necessarily advertise a position if we could do a move from displaced employees. Given where we're at in the budget, I fully expect that I will be able to relinquish that unilateral mandatory hiring freeze very soon, because it is in the fiscal year 20 budget, and all the positions that would be impacted are still in the fiscal year 21. But it was an exercise to make sure that as you went through your decision-making process, and if employees were impacted, we had an opportunity for them to be made whole, because layoffs affect families.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Michael. I concur with Joe. Joe and I discussed this, I think, 2 weeks ago, and I felt that 2 weeks wasn't going to be a make or break date, that we should have this discussion on today, and then we could move forward. So, go through an orderly process. I have,
Dana?
okay,
That's yours first. I just have a follow-up on Mike's question.
I'll let you go do that then while we're thinking about it.
Just on the cruisers, I just want to know what the path forward is from this year. I can see temporarily doing it once, putting it in free cash, but free cash in the operating budget is just a bad thing to do. 25 years ago, we put the cruisers in the budget, and have had them there for decades because they got voted down at town meeting once, because that was the next step. After free cash dried up, they said, well, let's put them out to override, and that failed. And we had to buy 6 cruisers the following year. It's a snowball thing. So we've had them in the budget for a long time. And I just want to make sure that what you're considering is in the future, we're going to put this one back in and have them both back in there, or 3 in there if we need them, or whatever, or is this a plan to get them all out of the budget?
If I may, Mr. Chairman? Sure. Mr. Chairman. I agree with the opening premise of your statement there. Using free cash in this manner is not ideal. If you recall, the capital outlay budget was well underway before I was put in the role of acting administrator. So that was pretty much a scenario that was moving forward. I'm very mindful of the predecessor board's policy probably 7 or 10 years ago relative to free cash. And my philosophy on free cash is you want to expand that and have that available. And one-time events are not what you, purchases of cruisers or things like that, which are rather routine, should not be done through free cash. So we're doing it this year. It's my hope and expectation we would not be doing that in the same manner going forward.
Okay, Dana? A lot of good questions. I'm going to stop it there. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I agree with everyone else, all the work you put into this. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.
We have fire and rescue next. Dave, you're...
I'm just the one who's in Florida. We just landed.
Good morning,
Good morning.
members of the board, member of the FinCom, chairmans, Mr. Powers, Mrs. Capola. First, I'd like to offer Chief Clark's regrets. He had a previously scheduled vacation and just texted me 5 minutes ago that he's on the ground in Florida. So while we're dealing with snow, he is not. Nor is he dealing with a budget hearing, which would be his last.
You didn't need to share that with us.
Yeah, but he's going on a cruise ship, so.
I believe there's been a change in plans on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we submitted a packet, some backup items to the packet, and part of that was I wanted to take a brief minute just to kind of go through how the fire department is staffed. feel it's important. We've always used these meetings as a little bit of an education piece, and I don't want to take a lot of time with it. But I don't think people necessarily understand always what we, because salary and wages is such a big part of our budget, up to 90% of it, and a big chunk of salary and wages is overtime, I don't think people necessarily understand how we get there. So it was important, I think, to put that information out. So fire department's currently staffed by chief, deputy, an EMS officer, a fire prevention officer, a 26-hour clerk, and then we had a 17-hour clerk. Our original budget eliminated the 17-hour clerk, and as you'll see as you go through the documentation, we actually restored that at at lesser hours and a lesser rate. And part of the reasoning behind that was Murph Eldridge, who was the part-time clerk, was down in Florida for a month, which he normally does, and I realized how inefficiently the office operates with only one clerk, and the office being closed those hours, and that we weren't serving the public in the best manner that way. So the budget, as we went forward, restored it. Once we get down to the shift level where everything happens, we have 4 shifts of 8 personnel. There's a captain, a lieutenant, a minimum of 4 paramedics per shift. And if everybody comes to work, there's 5 scheduled to be at headquarters and 3 scheduled to be in East Harwich. Our minimum is 7. This is a number that works. This is a number that we've strived a couple of budget hearings in a row to try and get our shift strength up to 8, so we could have a fallback to 7 and maintain 7-man minimum. Ambulance goes out the door with 3 people on it. It leaves a captain back. We backfill another position with overtime, so the captain's not by himself. Same with Station 2. That ambulance goes out with 3 people. We put 2 people back there again so that East Harwich remains covered. But because we don't control the call volume, that number increases. And if you look in the charts that were in here, just to show you, over 3 years, we had a 16% increase in runs. While last year we went down, over 3 years, it's a total of a 16% increase. So with that increase comes an increase in overtime. And we try to manage it the best as we can. Last year, we faced a $75,000 cut in the overtime budget, which eliminated some things that we had done in the past, like the bike details at Music in the Port and some other issues. We were fortunate last year we didn't have big storms. So far, we've been fortunate this year that we haven't had big storms, the tornado notwithstanding, and we've been able to survive on those reduced budgets. Additionally, in there, so we talk a little bit about the ambulance staffing. One of the things we kind of ignore is fire staffing. If we were to look at the standard, which is NFPA 1710, Angela, you'll remember when we did the manpower study way back when with Chief Flynn, that was the standard that we tried to hold to. We're not obligated to it. The town hasn't adopted it officially, but it's what we're going to be held to if something goes wrong, and certainly what we should try and achieve. Ideally, engine companies would have 4 personnel on them, and if we had a building fire, we would arrive with 15 personnel at the scene in, I believe it's a 6 to 7 minute window. We accomplish some of that through mutual aid. Any reported fire, we involve our neighboring towns, they not involve us, so that our on-duty shift, if everybody's in quarters at 7, we're going to get another 6 or 9 from surrounding towns, and then we recall everybody off duty to come in for the fire. But they're not going to get there as quickly. But that's how we handle those types of incidents. What changes with that is as the ambulance goes out, our staffing goes down. So if all 4 ambulances are out of town, there's 4 firefighters covering the town if we get enough people back. 2 at headquarters, 2 at Station 2. That changes that if you get a reported building fire dynamic very quickly, because now there's only 4 people. Now, the chief and I are available to respond, especially if it's during the day where they are, actually day or night. The fire inspector and EMS officer all supplement that, but we still, as the ambulances go out, our manpower drops. If all 4 ambulances are out, that's 12 people out of town, and then another 2 people, 3 people back on coverage. So you're using 19 people, 20 people of 32 people in fire suppression. So and we actually do that quite a bit. So it's a credit to the firefighters that work in the department that we're able to maintain that level of staffing. But it's always kind of up in the air, and you never know exactly what you're going to end up with. I did include some numbers in the presentation just because these questions are always asked in terms of how Fontaine Medical Center impacts our budget and how Outer Cape Health impacts our budget. Outer Cape Health, as you can see from the change in addresses, the impact is pretty minimal. We've gone there all the time when they're on Chatham Road. Now that they're on 28, we go there a little bit more, but not significantly more, and that facility expanded quite a bit. In Fontaine, since we had the big 700% increase when they first opened up, has leveled out. And while we're there quite frequently, and it constitutes a lot of runs, it hasn't increased significantly since it opened. I did include it, something we don't always talk about, but I thought it was important, the ambulance receipts. And if anybody saw the article in the paper, Orleans just had a study done. One of the things that it came out in Orleans study, and I think it was portrayed poorly, and Carol's aware of this, is that when we bill out ambulance, what we bill out well over $5 million a year. Immediately, Medicaid and Medicare return a number that we are not allowed to bill for, and it usually totals about $3 million. Of the rest of the money, we collect in the high 90s, mid to high 90s percentage of collectible money. When you look at Orleans' study, it indicated that their collections were at 33%. Well, they were counting the money that Medicare and Medicaid says you can't count. So studies are studies, and I'm not throwing dirt on that, but I think it's you need to be accurate in what you're actually reporting. We were able to last year, and we're in process this year. There's a program put on by Mass Health, funded through the federal government, to allow us to make up some of the difference of that money that we can't collect. It's an actual cost base. They look at what it costs to run the fire department, what it costs to do an ambulance call, and they allow us to bill additionally for that money. Last year, the total was $135,000 before Mass Health took their cut, and this year that number is $176,000 before they take their cut. And I just received notification yesterday that our desktop review has been done, so we should be on par for getting that number sometime in June like we did last year. Before I get into the budget and the cuts, just the final thing that we've always, and this is Chief Clark's direction, and I followed it since I've been deputy, and it's existed long before I was deputy. We've always realized that the fire department is one piece of a big machine, and we've always tried to, wherever possible, make sacrifices or manage our budget so that the town succeeds, and that is what we did as well as this budget. When I talk about the capital plan this year, we're on the capital plan for a lot of money this year. One of them is an ambulance, which is a routine replacement. We do them every 2 years, keeps the fleet going, and it's worked very well. The other is the Quint, which is $1 million, but it's also it's over 1.1 million, but it represents about a $900,000 savings because we took one engine off the plan last year, and we're buying the truck sooner than we would originally in the plan, and that lowers the cost, and we also are reducing the fleet size by one vehicle. I would be remiss if I didn't thank my colleagues in the back of the room from the DPW, Link, Kyle, and Sean Libby, and everybody that works with them for keeping our fleet running and keeping the buildings up to date. And yes, Station 2 is open and operating and is doing fine, so we're in good shape with that. If we're looking at the document that I submitted, I have the breakdowns by category, and I just run through them real quick, and then if anybody has any questions. Okay. The first deficit, again, was, or the reduction was, it's a 10% reduction in salary and wages for part-time employees, and that was changing the hours on that part-time clerk. That will affect our operations a little bit, but we should be able to keep the building open as it's open now. So there'll be somebody when you call the fire department 5 days a week to answer the phone. And it won't be a firefighter on the floor that doesn't have the answer to the question because it's a fire prevention question. So that was the goal with that. The big impact, the 4.18% increase in salary and wages is just meeting our contractual obligations. We looked at all of those. We made adjustments where we could, and you'll see a couple of those coming up. Overtime represented 8.2%. So when we did our original cuts, to tell the police story again, when we were directed to get down below 2%, represented about a $107,000 reduction in our budget. We were able to have $68,000 restored. We took 42 of that, put it back into overtime. This is the overtime that lets us cover Station 2, keeps the manning up. It will affect some things again, as we did this year. We won't be doing details for music in the port, but really those impacts were minimal, and we tried to do as many of those things as we could. The other area that we took a big hit at, and I'll touch on briefly, is training. That was where the other cut came from. We're mandated by the state to do some training for EMS. Everybody has to do a certain number of hours of recertification. Fire training is something that we, especially as the department's turned over now, we have 13 or 14 firefighters with less than 5 years on. We've lost a lot of experience. Trying to keep that experience in an area where we don't have a lot of fires, you do that by training. The Barnstable County Fire Academy being up in the air as it is, has kind of limited our ability to do training locally, and a reduction in that budget definitely has an impact on the department, but we will continue to do the best we can on that. The longevity reduction is because we have so many new hires, that number goes down. Take a 7% longevity person, hire them with a new guy, and there's a pretty significant reduction there, so. Holiday pay is the increase, just comes out of cost of living. Educational incentive, we've always budgeted for everybody to receive the educational incentive, because at any point in time during the year, they can come in and say, I got my degree, I need my, where's my money kind of thing. We actually talked to everybody that didn't have a degree, found out where they were in the process, if they were close, and based on what they told us, decided to reduce that number as part of the budget cuts. And we're comfortable that that won't cause a problem down the road. The as we go into the expense side, and we did take some, and the expense side ends up on the negative, but we did change some things. We've had since my predecessor was deputy, had a turnout gear replacement program, our PPE. We replaced initially 8 sets every year. And then as we hired new firefighters, we were almost getting to a point where we were replacing them too soon. So we backed it down to 6 sets. We've now gotten to a point where we need to increase it back to 8 sets, so that represents that 13% increase in that line. Utilities are utilities. We followed the calculations and the budget instructions, and those are where the increases come, or decreases as the case may be. The vehicle repair service line on it, the $15,000 decrease, that was an account that the chief we were able to build a forestry truck out of an old military vehicle and a piece of equipment we borrowed from Mashpee, and 26 cans of red spray paint, and probably a few years of the chief in my life that were lost. But we were able to build that truck. We used that money in that $15,000 is a special projects fund for things like that, because we can't expect Kyle to dip into his budget to help us do things that aren't repair oriented or weren't necessarily planned for. We're gonna not do a lot of projects going forward this year, and that's fine. We will be able to survive without it. As we go down, some of these are rentals and leases. We took some money out of replacement pagers for notifying the firefighters. We'll be able to survive with that. We replace a bunch of them every year, and we're in good shape. The reduction in medical or related services is because we're not hiring as many personnel in this budget as we were last year, so that number comes down. The 9% increase in other professional services is an increase in maintenance agreements with our software to keep track of our EMS calls and our fire calls. The good news is, while the phone line, our telephone and teledata service increased, and some of that's because we're using MDTs in the trucks now, mobile data terminals, firefighters can actually see where the call is, call information that comes from the county. So while that went up a little bit, we were actually level funded on the dispatch contract with Barnstable County this year. That actually went down a penny, 0.01%, which is nice. And the sheriff has been very responsive. We have quarterly meetings with him. Chief Clark's been an advocate of them keeping the number down, and he's been very responsive to those requests. Some of this is just based on the office supply increases, based on just actuals. We looked at what we used and realized we needed to increase it. In keeping with the recycled paper thing, it's more money. Recycled paper's more money, and we had to account for that. Bulk fuel went down. That's just based on, so we used the budget instructions again, this year's number. The otherwise unclassified, the reduction there is, the big part of the reduction again is because we're not hiring as many firefighters, so we don't have that's where the expenses to send them to the fire academy is, for their equipment, for their badges, their uniforms, all that stuff. So because we don't have as many positions being filled this year, that number went down. When we get to the blue section, this is the fire department budget is split into 4 pieces: salary and wages on fire, expense on fire, and then salary and wages in EMS and expense on EMS. The salary and wages on EMS is our training account, and you can see there's a 5% reduction in there, and that affects our ability to do training. We do have a grant in the mix, which hopefully we'll get some training money for, as we did this year, and kind of offset take some of the sting out of that. EMS fees and assessment was level funded. Cape and Islands EMS is a big part of that fee, and they kept their fee through Cape Cod Healthcare. There was a grant to help keep that fee level funded for this, I think it was a 3-year plan. Other purchase services went up, and the big part of that was we had service contracts on our life packs, cardiac monitors, and AEDs, and they had all were paid for originally in the article. The article money was done, and this year, so they had to be moved to the budget. And then an increase on medical and surgical supplies, and that's a function of both increased costs and, you know, the cost of doing business plus increased runs. We use more stuff, we do more runs. That is an area where we typically run short every year, and we're kind of stealing from other places to pay, so I was really hesitant to touch that at any point, because we just know we're gonna come up short there. The last piece I meant to mention on capital was, in this year, we are trying to replace all of our self-contained breathing apparatus and compressors. We're trying to do it through a grant. This is the first year we've been eligible for the grant. The original estimate was $400,000 with a $20,000 match from the town. Well, so it would have been $380,000 from the town, $380,000 from the federal government, $20,000 from the town. When we did the estimates on the grant, it came in much higher. So we don't need to change the $20,000 piece in free cash. There'll be training money attached to it, and we can pay the rest of the match out of training funds. So if you look on that sheet that shows the fire department capital plan, that shows the new breakdown of $20,000 from the town out of free cash, $7,300 out of fire department overtime, and then $575,000 from the federal government to pay for the grant. And that will replace 42 air packs with a spare bottle, 2 compressors, 1 for each building. It's a sizable grant if we get it. So we have to go back before capital outlay to update the plan before town meeting, but that's the plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave.
Giant run-on sentence, sorry about that.
Michael, I'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you for the reduced budget, or the reductions that you made. Overtime. What was the actual number? Carol, maybe you have it for FY19? Do you use what you budget, I guess is my question? And with the increase in the budget, there's other mechanisms to get that money if you go over. If we go back to a budget transfer or reserve fund transfer, why are we budgeting so much over on overtime?
So I don't know that we're so much over. We may end up a little bit heavy on the training side, and I will tell you, and this is a conversation that comes up, we approve training as it comes in, and we spend training money as it's needed. If we end up with a surplus at the end of the year, we don't go hog wild and do a bunch of additional training just to use the money up. But we budget based on what we think we need. Part of that is we budget 18 hours a year per person to go outside, and we budget for a certain number of full department drills and everything else like that. So that money, there may be, and I believe it might have been as much as $30,000 or maybe a little higher last year. We did what we needed to accomplish within the year. One of the things was the fire academy went out of business for live burns, so that it reduced our ability to do some full department drills up there that we normally would have done. On the emergency overtime side, that's an equation that's based, I build that every year based on runs and then what the projected increase is. So we usually run pretty tight on that one, and sometimes we run negative. The whole bucket will end up balancing out, but the overtime will be in the negative. And I think, I'm not sure last year, I'd have to look, but I think we were close last year on that line of being negative.
So I do have an overtime report for all departments, and it's a history that goes back to 16. If you'd like that report, I'm happy to hand that out. But it shows every department and what they've spent for overtime. The only thing that it doesn't do is give you budget to actual for like 16, 17, 18 and 19. It gives you the actual, what was spent. And then it gives you the 20 budget and then the proposed 21. So if you're interested in that report, I'm happy to distribute it.
Michael, can I follow up that question?
You
before
can.
Can I just, 1 second before you, the other piece of that was, we used to do budget less, and then with the, with the understanding you could always come back. And there was a shift at one point in time, and it may have been in 2000 when we hired the 4 firefighters to get away from doing that. Let's budget what we think we need and not have to come back at the end of the year and compete with everybody else. Sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Just one other question on that is, have you thought, or has there been any study done on hiring more provisionals to lower the overtime rate?
So we're restricted by contract in how we can use provisionals.
Okay.
They can only be used in a long-term absence, and we use them, part of the hit that we took in this year's budget, we usually budget enough overtime to replace one position out line of duty injury. We took that money away with the understanding we'll use provisionals, and historically we do. The overtime budget goes down if we hire more people, and there's a break point at which one becomes less expensive than the other, and that involves, it's going to involve a deep look into that.
Thank you, Dave.
Sorry for interrupting you, Michael. It's related to overtime as well. You made a comment that Station 2, you're using overtime to fund Station 2. Now, is that your long-term plan, or will you try to move into additional?
So since 2000, what used to happen, just to flashback how we used to operate, when the ambulance went out the door, we had 3 people in each station. The ambulance went out the door with 2, and we didn't hire anybody back. So when the ambulance went out the door and they transported the hospital with 2 people, there was potentially 1 person left in each station, and that was it. In 2000, we hired 4 firefighters to increase shift strength, and when we did that, we also supplemented the department overtime budget by, I believe, about $120,000 to hire a person back when the ambulance went out of town, so that we were always leaving 2 people in each station, because 1 person, we're waving the flag when we show up with 1 person in a truck. That's all we're doing.
No, I get all that.
Yeah.
My question is more is your long-term plan, the implication is that you're staffing Station 2 with overtime.
No, we staff Station 2 with dedicated personnel on shift out of the morning. When the ambulance goes out.
I misread that comment.
Yeah, when the ambulance goes out is when the overtime comes in, and that's the same in both stations. That model works the same.
The other curious thing, and I don't want to get too deep in operations, but you're using overtime for training. Is that to keep the shift strength up, that you don't do that during regular hours?
So they do regular training when they're on duty. Every single day they do, on average of probably 10 to 12 hours of training a month on duty. But some training is either off-site or requires them to not be on duty to get it done. Because while they're on duty, if a call comes in, they have to go to it. So if there's a class, we have a speaker come in and do a presentation in Brewster. If they were on duty, they wouldn't be able to, sit through the whole thing potentially, and then they lose the value of the training.
Sorry, Mike, I jumped in on overtime. Do you have any other questions?
I'm all set, thank you.
Don?
Just the same general comment. I appreciate contributing to the effort and understanding that it's not an aspersion to your department or anybody else that we ask for cuts. But thank
Understood.
you.
Steve?
Yeah, just to continue on with what you said, so in this line item for overtime, that is, what percentage of that is training?
So if you look at the training overtime is in the EMS side.
Oh, okay.
So that 168,750 represents all the training hours for paramedic recertification, EMT recertification, 18 hours of continuing education for every firefighter that would be outside the department, going to a Mass Fire Academy class or something like that, as well as full department drills. We actually have a Mass Fire Academy who's bringing a prop down here to do live fire training. That's how we're going to have to make up for it till the Fire Academy gets back on their feet.
Okay.
So that's all in that $168,000 is training for the department.
And when you guys did your analysis, you came up, am I correct, with 107,000 in cuts?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so we ended up with a give back of 68?
Yep.
Yeah. Here again, I mean, I know Dawn just said this too, but reflective of the same thing that the police department did. You guys, you know, sat there and were willing to make those kinds of cuts. You found them, and we appreciate that. And I hope, you know, that the people from the town that are watching, that are here in the audience, recognize the kind of work that's gone in. We're going to see this through the whole day. All the department heads have put a lot of work into trying to meet this 2%. So thank you.
Jack?
Mr. Kennedy. Yeah, again, I'd like to reiterate Steven's appreciation. Thank you for your efforts to keep this under 2.5. Quick question about salaries and wages going up.
Yep.
To the collective bargaining.
Yes.
What do we expect to see next year and the year after? Will it be 5% next year, 5% the year after that?
So July 1st is the last year of the contract, so if that's a little bit of a wild card, it depends on what the negotiated agreement is going forward. But with a 2% cost of living increase, and part of the reason that this is so much bigger is they restructured the contract in terms of steps and longevity. So we had some increases in there that had a little bit bigger impact than a straight 2% would. But it's hard to say, but that's actually pretty consistent to what it's been for the last 3 years. So that, you know, 4 to 5%, something like that.
Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome.
Mr. Torre?
Talk to me about the Quint. The Quint is going to replace another vehicle in the fleet.
To replace 2 vehicles.
2 vehicles.
Yep.
What happens to those vehicles?
You trade them in.
So you'll receive money for those vehicles?
Be off the, and it's hard to, I will tell you, Kevin, this will be the 4th fire truck that I've been involved in. It's hard to put trade money to that, which is why it's not included in, you know, 1.1 million is the cost of the vehicle. It will come down, but I can't tell you what it will be. We had an estimate last fall that the ladder would be about $70,000 on the trade, but 6 months could make a big difference in that market. It's very volatile. And the problem was because the NFPA standards change so frequently for fire apparatus, people don't want to buy old trucks because they don't meet the current standard. So it's some small volunteer department and somewhere will buy it because it's better than nothing. That ladder truck is good, but we're coming to a point where we're starting to spend a lot of money on it. It's been out of service 3 times this fall with some significant issues. Kyle's been able to keep it running. But that's going to affect its trade-in value as well.
So what's the trade-in value on both of the vehicles approximately?
Well, they indicated the ladder would be about $70,000. It's a 1992, so it's an older truck. The engine is probably not going to be that much at all because it's a dime a dozen. It's not that, you know, not that special. So in the past, we've gotten upwards of $5,000 or $6,000. In some cases, it would be better to keep them other than the maintenance for them because you're not going to get that much on a trade for them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Jerry?
Great numbers, thank you very much. It's, you know, there were some questions about overtime, but I met my wife on a first aid squad, so I know the training involved, the extras, and how to man a station, which again, people who are watching, if you are watching out there, to realize that once an ambulance rolls, somebody's got to man that station because it could be another accident 5 minutes later, and they don't understand that you have to continuously keep that thing up, and you cannot predict overtime. So I think your numbers are great. I think they might even be a little bit low, but keep them that way. But thank you very much.
And we're comfortable that we work with them. I mean, we're very, you know, obviously we had a budget request, but we're comfortable that where we're at, we'll continue to do what we need to do to keep the town safe.
You know, I've never heard any complaints about, you know, you weren't there on time, you know.
Try and keep that.
Thank you.
Mr. Lemantia?
Thank you. Mr. LeBlanc, when that study was done a number of years ago, a couple of things came to the surface. One, how many times the department analyzed their budget and how they spent money was done, so that, and they've been continuing to do that and properly. The other thing that was done that I thought was really important was explaining how important the timing of things was, like how fast you could get to people to pick them up in the ambulance or how fast you can get to a fire. And it indicates that you need to have the right equipment to work and the right number of people.
because of the timing issues, which someday I think you should present to the town.
It's a great, and I'll segue and I'll take a page out of Chief Clark's book. For the rest of your comments, I want everybody else to hold their breath. And we'll see how long you can do that for, because that's what we're talking about, is time. How long can you hold your breath? How long can you go without oxygen? And that's what we're talking about, at least on the medical side.
So that's,
Mr. Troy?
Thank you, Deputy Chief Dave. Just a couple quick, mostly clarification questions on my part. On the Quint, which I think is a great vehicle, I went and saw one at Chatham's vehicle, talked to the folks down there. They were very informative. How accurate is your estimate on the cost of the vehicle right now?
So the number that's in there, the actual estimate is a little bit lower than the number that's in the capital plan as of January, when the number was due. But we will have to, right before town meeting, sharpen that number, and we'll go into town meeting with, because we can buy it off a collective, the Houston Galveston contract. We'll know what the number is going into town meeting, which is, will make it a hard number, so.
And once it's, assuming it's approved at town meeting, how soon do you order this truck? Because I know they take a considerable amount of time to order.
Some of that comes down to when funds become available, when town meeting's certified and everything else. I believe as early as June, maybe mid to late June, we could potentially order it, or does it have to be July 1st?
Well, so the town can't incur any expenses with regard to something that's being funded from a general obligation bond until we receive what we call as a green light letter, which is kind of the letter from our bond counsel that says all of your paperwork is in order and you are authorized to go ahead and, go out into the market and borrow the money or sell the bonds. That typically will happen sometime around June or July, by the time all the paperwork is certified.
So within a couple months or so of order. Because not so much on this thing, but I have seen trends and other requests for department money on spending that it never gets spent. And when it does get spent, costs are much higher. So,
And we're 9 months. It's 9 months to build that truck.
On the Quint and on the pumper, are you turning in a pumper? Is that it also?
We're trading in. We have an ambulance and a Quint on the capital plan
okay.
for this year. Yeah.
No, but what are you trading in? No.
The ladder truck and an engine company, yeah.
You say trade-in. Have you ever concerned, and maybe Link can speak to that too when he gets up here, I'll ask him the same, is auctioning these equipments?
Yeah, we tried that once, and that was, trading them in or trying to wholesale them through a broker are the best options to get rid of them. We've done bids, and we got less money doing bids than.
Okay.
And it gets us out of the used fire truck business, which I have enough things to do. I really don't want to sell used fire trucks.
I'm just curious if you thought about that.
Yeah, no, we did. We tried it. If there's a way, we tried it, trust me.
Like we talked on the leasing, purchasing of a truck too, and I understand that piece also. On the Scott Air Packs or whatever, so you're going to buy all these Scott Air Packs replacements this year if approved?
Yes.
Because in the capital, you have them stretched out over 3 years.
Well, so there's two separate things in the capital plan. If I can't fund it through a grant this year, and I'll try the grant again next year, the problem is we're running up to an expiration date of when we have to start replacing them because they're no longer certified. Then in the capital plan, I split it in two so that it wasn't a big hit in 1 year to replace it. But if we do it in the grant, those other two numbers, that's $200,000 over 2 years, that goes away.
Okay. And any indication how successful grants are?
We've got two years in a row, so I'm hoping that not a lot has changed and I can be persuasive.
Okay.
We have a 40-year sewer plan that certainly adds a lot of credibility and weight to our need, so.
And last question is, how much was your budget decreased?
107,000 was the original cut, and then we added 68 back in, so I'm not sure what the.
Oh, okay.
Because
I was just looking at some numbers here, and I thought I heard 106, but I didn't see 106 reflected in these numbers.
Yeah, no, because we added, they were able to restore 68,000.
Okay, so.
We put 42 into overtime, and we put the rest into the part-time clerk position.
Okay, so I guess that's roughly around 40,000 or so. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Wiener?
So Deputy Chief, first of all, I want to thank you and your colleagues for the service you provide the community. I
Thank
have
you.
no questions.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. DeCosta.
Just one, a follow-up on the discussions on overtime leading up to the last time we made the big adjustments. We did form a subcommittee with 2 members of the selectmen, I was on the board of selectmen at that time, and 2 members of the finance committee that actually took the time to go down to the fire department and spend several days just going through every bit of overtime there is to really understand it and really make sure that everything was correct, and came back with a report back to the full committees that helped both sides. I mean, it comes up every year, talk about it a lot. I like the idea that Michael was pointing at about, you know, we have options to cover it if it's ever short. There's a lot of things that can happen. In terms of the, so that's an idea we might consider, is just doing that again. It's about time. In terms of the money from the state for the tornado, is that money that has been received, and what happens with that?
The money has not yet been released by the state. We continue to hear soon.
Okay. Thank you. That's my question.
I hate that was a bad question, Dana, we'll let that go. I've been mentioning to mention that we also invited our capital outlay committee, and several of them are here in the audience. We didn't have enough room to put everyone up front. So I ask now, and I'm not going to ask again, none of you are shy, so I'm assuming that you'll stand up and ask questions if you have any. Let me pause now and just double check with, Noreen and Pete and some others here. Any questions? From here on, let's just assume that you'll ask a question if it comes up. All right? Thank you, David, very much.
Thanks, David.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Can I
please, David.
step down on the next presentation?
You may,
and I'll
yes.
be back later.
All right.
Thank you.
No, you answer that.
You just can't help yourself.
I can't. Sorry about that. Next on the agenda is the reason we have the is Public Works, DPW, so.
Good morning, Lee Cooper, DPW Director. I have to my right Kim Berube, Senior Administrative Assistant, and obviously the brains of the operation. I also have in the...
We all agree with that.
Wait, I know, I'm stating the obvious. I also have with us today Kyle Edson, Vehicle Maintenance Manager, and Sean Libby, Facilities Manager. I believe Sean got called away on a community center generator issue, and hopefully he'll return. I'd like to start by thanking you for all your time. I know you're all volunteers and probably have better things to do than this, but it is appreciated to give us a forum to talk about our budgets. Under normal circumstances, I would have submitted materials for you to review prior to this meeting. Unfortunately, the budget process, from my perspective, is anything but normal and has actually been frustrating. And you might ask why. Because the DPW has been asked to absorb a 50% cost in municipal solid waste, which is due to market conditions, within the budget, while simultaneously meeting your goal of a 2%. With that, I have a spreadsheet that or a bunch of spreadsheets that I'd like to review for you. And this is essentially the DPW budget in chronological order as it was submitted, as it was evolving, and where we stand today. Feel free to chime in any. The first sheet is a total budget summary. That shows the request of $6.2 million, which is comprised of an expense of $3.4 million and salary and wage of $2.7 million. The current FY20 budget where we are was $5.6 million for a delta of just under $600,000 of $597,000, which represented a 10.5% increase. which is shocking. If we less the disposal area increases that were due entirely to market conditions, that number was $469,000. If we remove that, the total DPW budget request was $115,000 over FY20, or represented 2.0% increase. Let me say that again. Absent the MSW and C&D increases, we submitted a budget that was in compliance with your message and directive. I'd like to go on to the expense summary. That shows, at the very top, it shows the difference between the 20 and the 21 voted, and an increase in expenses of $535,234, which represents 18% increase, which is shocking. If we go down the column, you can see that many of them are in the negative and were decreased to meet that 2% objective of the board, with the majority of the increases coming from the MSW contract, which we signed, I believe, in February, or no, in January, strike that, of $310,000, an increase in C&D of $159,000. If we remove that $469 again, that's an expense increase of $27,000. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, I've got revenue, disposal area revenue of FY18, which is $2.1 million, and FY19 of $2.4 million. You need to add about $1 million in sticker sales and recycling revenue to that, for a total FY18 revenue of $3.1 and total FY19 of $3.4 million. Business has been strong. We could go to the next spreadsheet. This is the entire salary and wage spreadsheet. That's up $61,811. It's broken down by department within the DPW, and it includes no additional staff and no additional hours for any staff. And it's entirely driven by contractual obligations. We go to the budget, the next two sheets represent $810,000 worth of reductions that I was directed to make out of the DPW budget. At this point, you might say, where did that number come from? Well, in response to my instructions to meet your goal, let me start that over again. In response to the finance director's request to identify line items to meet the board's goal, I suggested stopping commercial MSW. What I was unaware of is doing so would reduce revenue. I knew it would reduce revenue. What I didn't know was that the DPW budget would have to further be reduced to make up for that revenue. Did I say that properly? Thank you. So it simply snowballed, essentially. That's how we got from the 469 that's identified on the front to where we are today, what's in your budget book. If we go to the next spreadsheet titled DPW Budget Reductions to be added back. This spreadsheet represents a compromise position that I reached with the acting administrator and the finance director this past Wednesday. You know what they say about a compromise, that's when everybody walks away from the table feeling aggrieved. I think that was, where did I hear that from? I think Peter Hughes said that to me one time on camera, actually. This spreadsheet was driven by the realization that we had not accounted for revenue. Pricing increases that had been voted by the Board of Selectmen back last May, or effective July 1, which increased MSW, commercial MSW, by $10 and C&D by $10, and a second increase that was voted this past December for commercial MSW based upon a new contractual rate. Those requests were made by me to maintain the margins on that material. At the top of the spreadsheet, and then with the increased revenue, we have a projection of $3,684,000. Out of that, the finance director agreed to put $500,000 back into the DPW budget. That $500,000 was spread out at the top here, which is essentially putting one full-time employee back into the budget and then paying for MSW and C&D. That's it. Almost a request. It's a little short of the request. If we can go to the next sheet, that left us with a total of $309,602 in reductions. The major reductions are the C&D at $141,000 and road maintenance at $50,000. Other than that, this was derived by combing the entire budget, and wherever I thought there was any latitude whatsoever, we made reductions. Not pleasant, but we did as requested. If we can go to the next spreadsheet, this DPW staffing comparison. I have 24 years of the various departments and how much staffing those departments had. The reason I'm providing this for you is because the DPW appears to have grown over the years. Well, it has grown, and it's grown by, 14 people from 1997. However, some of the core functions, the highway staff, full-time highway, has remained at 9. Full-time administrative staff has remained at 3. Vehicle maintenance staff used to be 2 and has been bumped up to 4 as a result of the town centralizing vehicle maintenance under the DPW umbrella. Disposal it was 6, and that has been increased to 8. One of the positions was increased. Essentially, when we had to stop burying material, we became a trucking operation. So it was necessary. Everything that comes in the gate there is trucked out, and we do all the trucking internally. And then it was simply business-driven. The one was 5 years ago in FY16, or 4 years, 5 years ago in FY16. The parks has essentially been 2, is currently 2. Cemetery department, 2, remains 2. Facility maintenance. In 1999, or FY99, the town established a building maintenance, hired 2 people to staff that. And then some time ago, we hired Mr. Libby, so it's like FY14, and then we hired a plumber to help out. So that has been increased to 4. Custodial staff, those custodians were transferred to the DPW back in FY10. And then an adjustment was made to that for 2 custodians that were not originally incorporated to put them under the DPW as well. So in the course of 24 years, we've gone from 23 to 37, but the span of our responsibilities has increased as well. I'd like to go to the last one. I just simply provided this for informational purposes. It's an organizational chart of the DPW with the staffing there, and then some equivalents, some full-time equivalents for any of the seasonal or permanent part-time positions we have. I'd like to close my formal remarks this morning by saying that the compromise reached, I'm not particularly happy with, but will certainly live with if the board determines that's in the best interest of the town. That said, I certainly would not oppose some relief if you felt it was worthy. And with that, I've concluded my formal remarks, unless you'd like me to go through articles
No, I
or...
think we'll go with questions now. Let me just comment, Jack, before I turn it over to you, that I want to be clear, especially, I guess, people watching TV, that holding the line to 2% that we've asked, that Joel's been pressing on it, that comes from our direction. The Board of Selectmen voted on that with our budget message. So I don't want to have the impression that our acting town administrator pulled that out of the thin air and tried to press it on all the departments. He's carrying the water for us, and so we're all in this together. And I think we come up with, Steve has mentioned every time down. We appreciate you all making the steps to move us in that direction. And then we'll see where we go from your further discussion. Okay, Jack?
Mr. Weiner?
So, Mr. Cooper.
Is he there?
You have to forgive me because I am the new kid on the block, but your particular budget was one that caught my eye the most because I'm very empathetic to the position you're in. And I lived in a community once where there was a major shift in the costs of solid waste, and there were radical changes made, and found an awful lot of waste ended up getting dumped illegally, and it presented problems. So I'm very curious. I'd love to understand. It appears, based on your budget, first of all, your narrative and some of the documents in the budget state that you are going to reduce the operating hours at the center. Is that correct, for recycling and trash disposal? You're proposing a reduction?
No, sir.
Okay. So the narrative in the budget, I apologize, I either misread or it's older. That being the case, it appears that you make money, you make good money on the cost of municipal solid waste. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Does that rate float based upon the cost that you experience, or is there some reason why we don't have a higher margin to provide the buffer that they need so that there's no adverse impact? Because right now it seems it's clearly the point of pain and inflection, and that's a pass-through cost from what I can see. So I'm curious, is there a reason why it seems so locked up and puts you between a rock and a hard place?
As the chairman just elaborated, the acting administrator was meeting the Board of Selectmen's goals of 2% increase. Unfortunately, my budget was submitted with a 10.5% increase. I believe we do, rather than say we make money, I'd like to say that the disposal area doesn't impact the taxpayers. It's only funded through user fees. And I'd like to keep that going. We signed a MSW contract, had no choice in the matter. In fact, we're lucky to get a contract the way MSW is going. That increased cost from approximately $60 a ton to $90 a ton. Right? That's a 50% increase. At the same time, we were notified by our C&D processor that was going to be a $5 per ton increase. Those were the increases that put the DPW budget out of whack.
But yet we don't pass through on the expense side. We don't charge more to the users.
Well, some of it is based upon market conditions. So the MSW, we need to base on market conditions. If we are too low, we would get too much commercial trash, more than we can handle. Same thing with the C&D. If we're too low, we get too much. If you're too high, you wouldn't. So those two functions are usually based upon market conditions. We have excellent margins on that material. We charge $120 for the MSW. Our new contract rate is $90, so that's $30 a ton, minus approximately $8 a ton for our hauling. For your own edification, each trip is about $200 to make, to CMAS, to Cavanta. We also, and when I say we're a giant trucking operation, we are. I've crunched the numbers, we're about 1,400 loads a year. If you average that out, that's a ton. That comprises of recycling loads, C&D loads, and MSW loads.
So, Mr. Cooper, to me as a citizen, I find your department the biggest bargain the community has, because for my sticker fee, I can fill my car up every day if I want, run to the dump and throw it away. I could also take 5 of my neighbor's trash with me and throw it away. And the problem with that is, that happens because my mother-in-law is retired and elderly, and her neighbor hauls her trash away for her. The reality is that it seems to me that the burden on you is unfair because we have a system that is disproportionate. You can be a massive user and be charged the same as a minimal user. And that seems to be wrong. It also seems to be, it seems to make the process of managing this much more difficult than it should be. This is a profit center, and so I would think that there's room to put money by revenue back into this, and that's my curiosity, why that can't be accomplished. And again, forgive my naivete because I'm the new kid.
Brian, let me just very quickly respond to that. We asked the town administrator, acting town administrator, and finance director to come in with a 2% budget we talked about. That's been, and then the purpose of those discussions are for department heads to come in and argue what we should add back, if we need to add back in. That's not the end of that. This draft budget is not the end of the discussion. It's the start of the discussion. And it's preferable what we've done in the past. In the past, we've often come in with a high budget, and it's much more difficult to remove things than it is to add something back. So we're starting the discussion. We're not ending it today.
I've been asked, I have Mr. House have a question, I guess?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome, Mr. House.
Aside from the philosophical problem of competing with what might be a commercial endeavor, there's a law that says that you're not allowed to make money, can't be a profit center. You can recover your costs and you can recover a reasonable amount of overhead that went into achieving those revenues, but you can't be running a business in there by state statute. It's not possible. You can only reflect the cost of the activity and the overhead that's associated with that cost.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Usually in April or May, I present my recommendation for disposal area fees. In that recommendation, I have a spreadsheet where I capture all the fees, all the costs associated with running the disposal area, including overhead that was just talked about, including vehicle maintenance department that keeps the fleet running, including everything in the kitchen sink, vehicle amortization, and so forth. At the end of that exercise, I try to balance the total of the business out to the total operation. So essentially, it's been formatted that the commercial business subsidizes the residential business, subsidizes the cost of your sticker, because there's incremental costs involved. Once you're doing an activity, it's only an incremental cost to continue doing that and do more than if you were starting from scratch. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Chori, I think.
Yes. Thanks, Link, and thanks for meeting with me a couple weeks ago and discussing this further. And just a couple clarification things. And Brian, I understand your questions completely. Because that is a bigger question, why do we shut down C&D and commercial MSW and just go to throwaway bags like a number of communities do on the Cape? But that's a whole bigger discussion for another day. Just clarifying what we have in front of us, and the operation you run out there, Link, is fantastic. I mean, I'm sure you're the envious of all trash disposal people on the Cape. But, on the budget reductions to add back, say you're going to add back 1,900 tons of C&D to give you 10,000, 11,000 tons of C&D. Yet in your reductions, you say 141,000 of C&D.
The delta was between the submitted FY21 budget and what we've agreed to here. So we've reduced C&D by that 153. It restored more than was originally there, and it represents the compromise.
So you'll hit 10,900 tons of C&D and then shut down that operation of C&D.
To curtail it. So as we approach the end of the fiscal year, I may have to put the brakes on accepting some material.
Okay. Again, that's maybe a discussion
And-
for further is,
If I could talk C&D, most communities chase that product out when they close their landfills. We capped our landfill in 2000, so we started trucking the C&D in 2000. We currently, we are charged $85 a ton. We charge $155. Our cost of handling that is about $20 a ton. So we essentially are making $50 a ton on that.
yeah. And again, to Brian's, or adding strength to Brian's thought is, why are we cutting something that makes us money? But that's a further discussion for a further time. On the reductions, when you reduce mattresses by 10,000, what does that mean? Does that
That's
mean
a good
you
pickup.
stop, stop taking mattresses at a certain point, or I'm just picking on that one?
I don't know how to tactfully address that. We get charged on what the processor picks out.
What they see.
What they see. And sometimes we try to stash as many as we can. They run it over with the trash compactor and do a good job about it. They may not pick it out. I felt like, just the number that $10,000 represents is a number we've more or less been charged at.
That someone who comes and takes the mattresses?
No.
I'm
They are in the C&D mix.
Yeah.
The processor, we take it to in Taunton, will send us a bill for the tonnage at $85 a ton, plus they will add on mattress
Oh, I
costs
see. Okay.
of what they find.
Do we charge separately for mattresses at the gate?
We do.
Yeah.
And as we get charged.
Yeah, okay. Last item on the reductions here, and it happened last year. You're cutting out $4,000 for the White House field lights. We had an emergency transfer from our budget for a fix of those lights, like 3 weeks before the season was going to happen. I think it was like $25,000, $30,000. By cutting that out, $4,000, I know there's no such thing as a guarantee in life, but are those lights going to work for the season coming up for the baseball team? Because that's a huge draw to this town, those lights. And I'm just, and I don't even think 4,000 is enough to cover that personally. I mean, if we had an emergency transfer of 30 last year, and those are supposed to be in horrible shape, I feel like impacting those, that White House field lights is a tremendous concern.
You're preaching to the choir. I was given a directive to try to meet the 2%. I went through the entire budget, and I picked out what I thought was palatable. Most of these reductions are maintenance-related.
Yeah.
And a lot of it affects other buildings, meaning a lot, well, that's what you just brought up, the lights, affects our building. The DPW provides services to just about every other department around here. Again, this was a judgment call. I went through, and the only thing I left unscathed essentially was vehicle maintenance, because that's been upside down ever since I've been director, actually. Meaning we spend more on vehicle maintenance than was in the budget. So I couldn't touch that. I honestly touched about everything else I could.
Okay, and Sean's not here, so he'd probably be the best person to
He
answer
could
that.
answer that directly.
'Cause I'd like to see what condition those lights are in today, to see if they can make it through the season. But that's, and like Larry emphasized, this is just the start of the budget, it's not the end. So thank you.
Mr.
Chairman?
Mr. Valentine.
Thank you, Chair.
Larry? Larry? Joe had a question?
I'll defer to the chair, but I'd like to make a comment in a moment, sir.
I'm testing my memory, but as I recall, looking at the draft town warrant article, there's a warrant article by CPC for lights in Brooksfield coming up. And so the maintenance hopefully will be short-term for a few months when we get the lights.
If I may, there's an article 2 years old that's for Brooks Park lights to be replaced. There's a new article this year for the White House lights. So you've got two lighting projects going on that,
Well, if I
close.
may, immediately to that, and the previous speaker is correct, we're working on procurement right now relative to the Brooks Park lighting, but also leveraging the electrical engineer that will be brought on board to have them do an analysis of lighthouse field lights as well. So we'll have a much better understanding of what that's really going to need as we get into the season and beyond. But, Mr. Chairman, I wanted to take this opportunity just to keep the discussion, or bring the discussion back to the difficult conversation. And I appreciate the commentary thus far from the participants. I want to make it clear to everybody that, as the director has mentioned, the director's response in early January, mid-January, to the directive was to impact upon commercial MSW to a significant degree. I used that opportunity to do the exercise of what if we eliminated commercial MSW, to ask the question at that point in time, and then extrapolated that to what if we close down the transfer station, or the better way to say it, I think, is reduce the hours from 7 days to 5 days a week, because we needed to get into that discussion, because that discussion's out there in the marketplace, for lack of a better word. And to use the word marketplace, I've heard margins and profit. What I'd like to add to the equation is commoditization. Well, what we're mindful of is there was an impact on the commodities market because of, the fancy way to say it is geopolitical concerns. It's a fancy way of saying China dropped the market out on recycling. But that bore the point that MSW and solid waste is essentially in a commodities market. And if we think of it that way, because we can't think of it in terms of profit, that's for certain, I don't know that we can accurately call it margins, and I'm not convinced, quite honestly, that cost recovery is as articulate a phrase as we think it is when we really get into the discussion of indirect costs. But we do need to be mindful of the overall economy as it impacts on that commodity. And I say that because we need to have a deeper discussion today to have a chance of avoiding that deeper discussion on May 4th, having that derail the overall budget process. It's too big of an issue to not walk away today without more input on that. Thank you.
Good. Good. Who do you want to have talk next?
Your call.
My call, okay. Where are we at? Angelo?
I find this conversation very, very interesting. If I've learned right during this meeting, is that the DPW can collect the trash and whatnot and cover the costs on the fees that they have. Is that what I've heard 2 or 3 times? Okay. Then I find out that they're in the hole doing a lot of other projects. And for, I don't know, 10 years, they've been suggesting to this town that you need to understand what each department is spending on what they do. The DPW cleans the beaches. The DPW cleans and maintains the outhouses on the beaches, all right? Hey, if I were doing what Link was, I would say, gee, I don't get any benefits in the DPW area for that. Why doesn't that department pay for it? I think that's what the problem is. We have that particular, I'm sorry to be picking on that one, but we can take other ones to pick on. The lights, guess what? There are revenues that are collected on many of the games that are played. Maybe it needs to be a larger number of dollars collected. DPW doesn't need to collect the numbers. So why do we want to have DPW reduce what efforts they do on our roads and on those kinds of activities that are normal for a department, and not have the people who are getting the benefits? I mean, in this pile of data that we have here, there is a number that on how much the rec department collects on fees for the beaches. Shouldn't they be covering the cost of operating it? And why not? Because what happens is, as I said before, what you're doing is you're forcing Link to take out money from roads and everything else, and, well, people don't have to deal with the beaches or other kinds of activities. But you need to know how much money you collect, how you get the money, whether it's taxes or fees or money from the state, and what you spend. And then you can make better judgments than the way we make them. So I'm sorry. I think that the way we're going through this is not appropriate. We need to know what each department spends. I'm not saying that the rec department has to cover 100% of its costs. You just have to know, and the public has to know, what they are covering and whether it makes sense that they cover more or less. I'm not burying it. We shouldn't be burying costs by department, period.
Steve, did you have your hand up?
I did. I guess I could comment in relation to that, but Michael, I think Michael, relative to this,
Michael,
has
do you want to say
Yeah,
something?
just relative to Angelo's comments, and I completely disagree with that logic. We've argued about this for years. We're gonna clean the beaches regardless, whether rec uses them. We're gonna mow Brooks Park regardless, and that is, in my mind, a function of DPW. As far as the cuts go, I'll wait my turn to get into where we're at with the cuts, but I don't think that we should be penalizing other departments to make budget cuts on things that I believe DPW will do, should do, rather than the community center taking care of their own grass, or rec taking care of the beaches or the parks. But and I know what you're gonna say, Angelo, but we've back and forth on indirects. It's not rec's responsibility to clean the beaches, in my opinion.
You didn't understand me. Obviously, the DPW should be doing the work. The group that should pay for the work is the group that benefits from it. And
And the group
That's
that
the
benefits
difference.
from it is the taxpayers and the visitors, in my opinion, not rec.
what, you think, well, never mind.
Yeah, we'll move on. This is an interesting debate, and I'll just jump in and say that I take each of the points. I'm on Angelo's side in this to the extent that it should be part of our decision, our decision-making of who, how we handle this going forward. Not that you shouldn't be doing it, but it's hard to discuss without that information. But we'll debate this, continue, I'm sure.
Okay, Tom?
Well, John kind of stole my thunder, because the lights hit me right off the get-go. Of course, electrician. But I just, if you reduced it by 4,000, I was just wondering what it was originally?
12.
12, okay.
Yes, sir.
So you're up, so we still have an 8,000 somewhere to keep them going. Because we did have that emergency fix last year. I know there's maybe a warrant floating around that may replace them, but at this point, it's just, are they up and running? Are we gonna have another emergency, like, first game's next week and we don't have no lights?
They need to be replaced. I think that is work in progress, as the acting administrator just
Is it out for bid, do you?
I don't believe it is yet, but it needs to be.
Okay.
And it really is, every time you have to have somebody climb up one of those towers, it's inordinately expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
Because you can't just call the local electrician to go replace the light bulb.
Thank you.
Mr. Twerk?
I have more of a commendation than a comment. It's really easy to manage when there's a lot of money around. But your management skills are really tested when you have to make cuts and still provide the town with the services that it deserves. And I just think that we have some of the best managers around. Your colleagues, Link, and yourself just do a great job in terms of keeping the boat afloat and going forward. So I commend you for that, and your colleagues.
Thank you. I've surrounded myself with good people. That's the secret.
Yeah.
Dale?
Thank you. And thank you for your cuts. I'm sure they weren't pleasant, but they're effective. Could you talk a little bit about the recycling operation in terms of the costs and versus the...
So recycling, we have typically, prior to probably 3 years ago when China stopped accepting stuff, we turn in somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 in revenue. That number is $75,000, and the only reason it's 75 is because light iron has offset the cost of recycling. We are paying $200 a ton for the privilege of recycling plastic. The reason it's not a big a deal is plastic doesn't weigh much, right? Returnable glass bottles, nobody wants. Glass, we had a plant shut down that was in Franklin, we've been going to for 25 years, just shut down last year. Luckily, the town of Dennis took up a pilot project where we're able to bring the glass there, they're able to reduce it into a uniform size and reuse the product. It's recycling. We are mandated to provide recycling services by DEP for waistband items. All of the recycling that you probably think about are waistband items. So it doesn't make financial sense because you're hauling it and spending labor. We are in a better position than some of our neighbors because we never went to single stream recycling. You will always have to pay for somebody to separate the material. I've been around long enough. In fact, I started my career in 1991 at the disposal area as a heavy equipment operator, trailer driver, and then I ran it for, I think, 10 or 12 years. We never bid off that single stream or dual stream recycling. The towns that have since stopped with the new prices of their contracts to do so. So because the residents go through the trouble of separating it, I have not had to come back to the board yet because of any of the market conditions that have happened. In fact, we haven't had to raise the residential sticker rate since 2016, if memory serves me correctly. And again, that's been a product not of the recycling markets, but a product that the C&D and the MSW has been so strong.
The stickers are definitely a burden.
I believe they are. There's not much, you figure you have access to the facility all the time. I would like to comment on a bargain that it is. I will be recommending to the board to increase residential stickers by $20 a ton. That's what it looks like right now. However, DEP has data that says the average household generates 1.25 tons per year. Okay? We just got a new contract price that went up $30 per ton. So if you do the math, you'd say the residents should bear a $30 increase at a minimum. I think we're going to be able to keep that at a $20 increase and still keep it in balance. Or I hope to.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, I'll move to our side, Steve.
Actually, I think, Link, commenting on that, one of the towns just announced they went to 30. Yarmouth or Dennis or somebody, it was in the newspaper the other day. So it reflects exactly what you're saying. I think my first question would be to Joe and to Carol relative to the compromise. Is this a compromise that you both have felt would work within the 2% that we're trying to accomplish here, that has been?
Yeah, so my first response is, as I said this morning, we have a balanced budget. And that's the number one priority. How we get there was in concert with the department heads. So I have no issue what was in the book, and I have no issue with what has been presented. And my line is supposed to be, I'm not happy, because we did reach that compromise. But the budget is balanced. That's the primary concern.
So the numbers that have been represented, you both are in agreement with relative to what Link presented?
Speaking for myself, yes. However, it's contingent upon the revenue marks being hit. And I'm concerned about the overall outside influences in the marketplace. But generally speaking, we have a balanced budget. We have a recommendation by the department head, and I have no issues with going forward as that.
And Link, you're comfortable with those revenue marks that
Not, the revenue marks?
Yes.
Yes, I am. And I am for a couple of reasons. As I stated earlier, most of the towns had chased out any commercial business, stopped doing C&D, started And how they did that is just raised the price to $200, $250 and drove the business out. A lot of municipalities have stopped doing MSW. This time of year, commercial MSW is not a problem because we're very cyclical, very seasonal in nature. Our business doubles in the summer. There's only one place to go these days on the Cape, and that's the town of Yarmouth, which runs the rail. Well, actually, the town of Yarmouth leases the facility to Cavanta, the waste energy plant, and they rail the trash from that plant from the transfer station to the plant. There are times when they reach their maximum permit during the summer, and there's times the plant goes down. And in those times, when we're not available, there's nowhere else on the Cape to go. We've had so many landfills closed down, and that puts the pressure on. It's not that there isn't existing capacity. There is with Cavanta. They're the largest plant in the state. They have a permit for 2.1 million tons per year. It's when that plant goes down, it's utter chaos in the entire state. It really was. We used to be able to be diverted to landfills. Those landfills have since closed. So the safety valve that Mr. Camara presented to you and talked about in his presentation is no longer there. And we are part of that safety valve for the commercial hunt.
Thank you, Link. We'll have to, I need to move on just so we can keep going.
Yeah, let me just finish one comment. I think that a lot of people in this town don't realize what DPW does, and I know that several of you folks have pointed this out, and rightfully so. I think very few people actually recognize all the services you provide, and that's expanded from 5 or 10 years ago to today, and it makes you a natural target. I think there's no doubt about that for how we can resolve our budget issue, and for that, I certainly appreciate the work you've done here, Link, to try to work with Carol and Joe. And I know it's been very difficult, and I know you hope that the selectmen consider the possibility of reducing the impact on DPW as we move forward with this budget debate. But I think it's very, very important for everyone to recognize all the services that you provide. I mean, even the other day, we were talking about how, the elevator, there was a problem with an elevator, and it was $10,000 right there. People don't recognize that. And if you go around to each department head, you'll recognize, too, that, there's the custodian, the use of custodians and how Link's DPW has taken that over. There's a lot of department heads that feel it's not sufficient and that they need more resources, not less resources. So, it's a big operation, DPW. And I think, we need to appreciate what Link and all the staff have done at DPW to try to fill this gap for us on this budget debate. So thank you for that. I do think and thank you, Joe and Carol, for working hard to come to a compromise here. And hopefully, as we work through the budget, Link, maybe we can find a way to make the impact less than this. But we appreciate what you did.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got to reiterate again, we got 58 days left until we present this to a town meeting. The reality is that anything that can get us to our objective, and that was to save the $1.8 million, is important. The 3 biggest places we could get that are police, fire, and DPW. I mean, you can't get it from 2 or 3 person offices. Given where we are, I think we have to accept what's being presented, but there is some merit to what Angelo had said and what Michael had said, even though they're different, diametrically opposed. My problem is that some of this has to happen after town meeting. If I'm fortunate enough to still be representing people in town, I think we need to have a more profound discussion about who's using what, and what the fees go to. We got $1 million worth of revolving funds that essentially everybody thinks they own their portion of. If this were to work right, people who go onto the beach and who give money, if it goes into a revolving fund, it should be dumped into general treasury receipts the next year and allocated out to the proper place that would be taking the hit to perform the service, which would be DPW in certain cases. But we're chasing something that's too big to do in 58 days. So pretty much I would advocate that we got to take the compromise that we've got move forward because we've gotten the objective achieved, and then look at something more profound about how we fund, you know, something where the revenue goes here, but the service is performed over there. So that's my only comment. I'm with Steve. I mean, I'm glad that we could achieve something that maybe everybody's not happy with, but it gets us to the point where the town is benefiting in the way that it has to benefit this year.
Thank you, Don. Michael?
Thank you, Link, for your cuts. Just for clarification, I guess, to Carol and Joe, at the beginning of this meeting, we were told that we were coming in with a 0.33% increase, but now we're adding back 500,000, so what's the actual proposed increase?
Sorry, I'd have to calculate that for you.
Okay. If we could get that number, that's one. Two, on the commercial MSW link, it's been shut down for 7 months.
It's been shut down for 6 months, but yes.
Six and
Yep,
change.
longer than I thought, yep.
Okay. So with that shutdown 6 months, what has been the loss of revenue to the town and then offsetting costs? Do you have a sheet that shows us?
I don't have a spreadsheet to hand you. I know that I ran a calendar year report that I discussed with the finance director that showed our gate receipts were $2.3 million for the calendar year. For the previous fiscal year, that was $2.4 million, as was in one of these spreadsheets. So we were down on revenue about $100,000 due to that shutdown. So you sit there and go, why? Well, just because I said the business comes in the summer. I mean, more than half of the business comes for those 4 months in the summer. There's no real pressure on it during the winter.
Okay. If you could put something together, for me at least, showing what the difference is and any cost savings that we had.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. The cost savings, why I have not had to come to the board and say, this new contract, we are upside down, was because we haven't been doing the commercial MSW. So as soon as we get the second contract, I plan on opening that up so that we hit the revenue numbers, but I don't have to come back and get supplemented to get to the end of the fiscal year.
Okay. If you could show that as well, I appreciate it. Link, you were before us a month ago, and you were talking about contracts, and there was emergency shutdowns. You had to shut down commercial MSW because we had no place to take it. In that meeting, you said that you were in a full cost recovery mode.
Yep.
Can you just explain that and explain to me why we're taking all of this commercial MSW in just to break even? And have you done any analysis on not purchasing the extra tractor trailers, not doing 1,400 runs off Cape, and possibly shutting the dump down? We didn't get to see this deal, so I haven't seen any of the numbers, but shutting the dump down 2 days a week or acting like other dumps on the Cape, which I think we're the only one open 7 days a week, has there been any analysis done to what actual cost savings would be? And I think this board needs to debate anyway, that service and the potential savings, and without seeing it, I don't know. I'm happy that we brokered this deal, but should we at least look at it?
Okay, if I may.
Sure.
Yes, I've looked at those costs. We are a trucking operation, right? We run most of our loads Monday through Friday. If we were to close the gate on day 6 and 7, unless somebody's proposing to close on Saturday and Sunday, which I'm assuming nobody is, we've got staff on the road. Because you may shut the gate, you're still taking in the same amount of residential trash, you're still taking in the same amount of recycling, and you're gonna push some commercial business away. They find the gate open, they're gonna go to Yarmouth, who is open 7 days. Our gate closed, they're gonna go elsewhere, some of the business. So to open days 6 and 7, we do so, I would like to think, pretty efficiently. We do so with permanent part-time labor that's paid $20 an hour without any benefits to work the scale house and the transfer station. So that's like $320. And you also need one full-time operator on site. Call that another $300 for the day. That's $600. That's a bare minimum to get through.
Link, let me.
I'm almost there. I know
was
you.
going to say, but rather than go through off the top of your head, possibly you could just give this to us in writing, and then we can have a discussion later on. And that way we'll have the facts in front of us.
Would you like that submitted to the board, or just
Send it to
Selectman
the board,
McCaskill?
because then we all get it.
Okay,
Or
can I just
actually submit-
finish my real
Submit
quick?
it through Joe, and then we'll get to the
Oh,
board.
submit through Joe, okay. So real quickly, in round numbers, about $1,000 to open the gate. It's actually under $1,000. If you take the $2.4 million worth of gate receipts, exclude stickers, right, divide that by 6 days a week is 312 days in a year. That's over $7,000 a day. So $1,000 to open, and if you amortize the business out equally, that's $7,000 that comes in through the gate in receipts. I see there is no efficiencies to closing the gate because of the model we use. I know other disposal areas have, other than Yarmouth, and they do so because they've chased all the business away. Some of them have gone to pay-as-you-throw, like the town I live in. And
Again, Link, I think you have a good response to it. Why don't you
Okay.
give it to us?
you're saying to me, shut up, I'm long-winded. Okay, I get it.
Thank you, Larry. Don, I'm sorry, are you still?
Go ahead, if
No,
it's
no,
on
go.
that, okay. So I guess my concern, Link, is that it was a dire emergency to get a new contract. We weren't able to dump what we were taking in, and it seems that we continued to build this operation, and it seems that you're making money. But at what point, it was mentioned in those meetings by Cavanta and the other one, that they're not making any more dumps. So how much does the town of Harwich want to continue to ramp up to take in all of this trash, to maybe get rid of it, maybe not get rid of it, or maybe shut it down later, after we've bought tractor trailers, after we've hired more people? I just want to see that it makes sense, and have that debate, I think, Larry, at one of our meetings.
Excuse me, you got a guy from your
Hi.
group.
Angelo.
Don made a very valuable comment about it's going to take time to go through and do all of those kinds of things, and I understand that. But there are a couple of things that are very simple to do. I believe that finance people can come up with the appropriate numbers very quickly. Those people can have those numbers very quickly. And then they'll be able to make a judgment which they are not able to make. And that judgment is, what should we be charging in fees to do this particular thing? If you ever go to meetings with the water department or the Waterways group or the golf course, who have very high income on revenue, they try and look at what they have coming in, what their costs are, and to make sure that they can cover their costs. If they don't know those numbers, they haven't the idea what they should be charging in fees. So if the other departments at least get those numbers, they can make a judgment on whether it makes any sense to them to increase their fees. And if they do increase their fees, that's more money that comes in, hopefully, if they don't do it too high, to cover our business next year. And I don't know how I can be in a department, not know what my costs are, and say, okay, we're gonna do this, and I'm gonna charge people $1. Maybe it costs $4 million to do that. They just need to know what that number is. And I think the world has changed. In the olden days, many of the people in this town had houses that weren't valued that high, particularly a lot of the people who are relatively old these days, who are having problems because the value of their house keeps on going up and up and up, and their taxes are up sixfold, versus their house being up twofold or whatever it is. And what's going on is we have a lot of senior citizens who don't play pickleball, who don't go to the beach, who don't go have boats. And if they can cover this stuff with the people who do that activity with their fees, guess what?
Angela,
You're
right,
gonna say-
this discussion will continue.
Okay, bye, thank you.
Michael, and then,
Unrelated to the dump, first and foremost, thank you, Link, and your entire team. We have the best roads, we have the best beaches, the sides of the roads are clean, our buildings are very well maintained, and I think the DPW does a great job. Related to your budget, the employee, one more full-time employee, where's that employee going?
That was a highway position that got fetched up in the hiring freeze, an unfilled position that I plan to fill if the freeze is lifted, and that was that position that I put within the initial cuts.
Okay, and the other position that we did hire this summer that is a full-time hour position, is that a second full-time position?
No.
And what are we doing with that position? I mean, that maybe there's a time for, different time for a conversation, but at least, I mean, I think at this point, we have hired somebody that's working full-time hours. Is this proposal to bring in another full-time employee?
I view the two as unrelated. One is within the Highways and Maintenance Employees Union that's unionized and entitled to all the full benefits that come along with that bargaining agreement. And the other is a permanent part-time person that I've used more than I probably should be.
Okay. Right. That was one question. The other question was on the, you guys seem to get a lot dumped on you. So under the past administration, I know that there was the intersection of 139 and 137 decided we wanted grass out there and all the trees taken out and irrigation put in. That wasn't part of last year's budget, correct?
No, that was a couple years ago. I think that was 3 years ago.
No, the recent work that's been done in conjunction with Fire Station 2.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
That
you meant
wasn't part
Pleasant
of-
Bay Road and 39. I apologize.
That was not part of the budget, correct?
No.
Okay. Second, the harbor, when you did the work at the harbor, were you reimbursed by the harbor for the work you did at the harbor?
No, sir.
And that was added on after your budget was approved. And then the parking lot for Harwich Conservation Trust on Queen Anne Road, that was just something extra you did, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
If I may conclude with one last remark, thank you for bringing a lot of those situations up. What effect these budget reductions may have is my ability to do things like Selectman McCaskill just said. Essentially saying yes to people. It's great to be able to fill needs when people, fellow department heads, town administrator, whomever, or residents and taxpayers come, it's great to say yes, and my ability to say yes.
And we've debated this in the past, Link, but my personal view is that those should be planned activities with your effort involved going forward. So they're accounted for both in not only the expense side, but in the staffing side as well. You know, because you're real people doing real work, and whether it's contracted out or done inside, we should have that. I hate to have something just dumped out all the time.
I don't disagree with you, Selectman Ballantyne. A lot of these things are just unplanned circumstances where the budget does not meet the expectations, and if we're able to help, we certainly will do so.
Thank you, Link. I have Michael, do you have more on that? Maureen?
I think you can hear me. Just very quickly, thank you for all this information, Link, and the question I'm asking may be answered in this because there's a lot to absorb. But for future discussion about the DPW, is there a way for us to tell about how many runs a year are done for commercial MSW versus residential MSW, and also for commercial CD versus residential CD, so we can better line up the costs versus the revenue of the separate, and not.
I can answer that for you,
Sure.
if you'd like. Total MSW in last fiscal year was 454 runs. The commercial accounted for 200 can't read my own writing, I'm sorry.
277.
277 commercial runs. When you're doing an activity, as I stated earlier, there's only an incremental cost in doing it. I don't think anyone's proposing or saying we should not accept residential trash. So therefore, we're in the business. There's no real separation to it.
And did you say they were about $200 a run?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and the CD breakdown?
C&D accounted for 718 trips. And that's all paid for at in-gate receipts.
Right, so no, oh, that's true.
If you're going down back, you go across the scale and you pay for
Thank
that.
you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, did you have something?
Just a
additional?
procedural point to the chairman through the boards and anyone that has it. And the director's document indicated as total budget summary. Mindful that it's a public document, I would ask everyone to take every effort to redact the proper name that appears on page 4. That should not have been distributed with that name in there. We can make reference to the position, but we shouldn't be making reference to a person. So I would just ask anyone that has that to be mindful of that and please redact it.
I apologize for that. I changed the other one that was brought to my attention. I missed that one.
Look again. Let's close this discussion then.
I want to let you know how much I personally am pleased about the quality work that you're doing here and your service orientation and your willingness to compromise as far as you could. No further business on our part, so we are adjourned.
You're not part of the
Recessed.
rest of the, we're recessed
Well, we're adjourned for this section.
for this session.
Oh, this.
I think go home for one thing.
I'll just add, I appreciate what you've done on this budget, all the detailed presentation as always. You're very well prepared with a lot of detailed questions, and was working with Joan. We'll continue this discussion.
Thank you for your time this morning.
My pen is under your ear.
Any good pieces?
Lake, if Dana's out there, would you ask him to come in?
So many papers.
Dana, if he's outside there.
It's free to come back in.
Moving on then, we'll go to the finance division.
Yeah, we can't shake hands though. Coronavirus. We could do that.
Who we looking for? Joe, who's, Carol, is that?
Who's gonna be presenting the accounting?
I'm going to join
you go
my fellow staff here at the
Okay.
table.
That's great work. Better get it,
If you have your budget book available to you, if you would turn to page 25.
Get to use the book.
The finance division includes the accounting office, the treasurer collector's office, and the assessing office. Overall, the budget is decreased for the proposed budget for FY '21, and that's largely in part to the treasurer collector and the assessor's budgets. If you're looking for a breakdown of the budgets, because this is in total here on page 25, you could go to page 72, and it would show you a breakdown of all the different offices and how their salaries and wages and expenses and the increases. You will see that the finance office, the increase in the finance office is for salaries and wages. We have some reductions for OPEB valuation. We go through that every 2 years. So this is an off year, so we were able to reduce the budget for that. I will tell you that this is the second year in a row that I have asked for significant funding for this division in the areas for training, to fully embrace the ERP system that we have. And as a Board of Selectmen's goal was to increase transparency. And the way you increase transparency in finances is provide that information to the public and provide it in a manner in which it's easily accessible. And I can tell you that I did some research maybe 2 years ago now, looked at a lot of different products that were on the market, concluded with a product that was, it's called Socrata, presented it to the Board of Selectmen. They said, if you can get funding for it, we'll go, we're in support of it. We were not able to get funding from the state, but it doesn't stop me from including that in my initial budget. So those were all reduced. But however, the finance department, just my department with a couple of staff members, the budget was an increase of 2.6%. and that was largely due to increases in contractual agreements. The treasurer collector and the assessor are here to provide you information. I also have prepared for you, or we have prepared for you, some information, historical information on abatements and exemptions that are provided by the assessor. So I'll let you take it.
So, the exemptions are pretty, they run about the same each year. A lot of them, you'll notice that we have a lot of seniors that receive exemptions, which is a great thing, and work off. So the reason why, so you'll see in fiscal year 19, it's up a little higher. That's because we had the supplemental, which raised the exemption to $1,500, but we weren't approved by legislature yet. So that's why that increased. So that 69 people increased. So now we have the full $1,500 per person, so we don't have any more supplemental adjustments for that. And the abatements, well, so far this year, we're still in the process of that, so that's why that's so low. But as you can see, we do run pretty steady on that. We keep the numbers pretty low.
So every year, the town raises funds for anticipated exemptions and abatements. For the proposed budget, that number is $400,000. In addition to that, you'll see an offset in revenue if you look at, pretty closely at the documents. And the assessors also give back when they say, we have excess overlay that we are giving back to the town. We consider that a revenue source, and we're estimating that to be $200,000 for FY21. If you look deeply into the assessing budget, just the assessing budget, you'll see that there's a decrease, an overall decrease in the proposed budget for FY21, and that is due to staffing changes. So we had a retirement in the department when we rehired and filled the positions that were open. We were able to do so at a lesser rate of pay, so that's why you'll see that there's a difference there. In FY21, the assessing department or the town of Harwich will be undergoing a revaluation. So there's funding in the budget to support that. The town contracts out with PK valuations right now. That is also going to be going out to bid for FY21, so I can't tell you for sure that that'll be the same firm, but that's historically who the town has used for that function. Right?
Yes.
Okay. You want to take it?
Good morning. So you'll see on the questions I did fill out, the major change to my budget is a proposed billing change. Instead of mailing the bills 4 times a year, mailing them twice a year with 2 coupons, payment coupons in each. I do plan on advertising this quite a bit and sending out reminders. I've asked Jamie if we can do a reverse 911 call when the bills are going to be due to remind people of that. But that would be a reduction. I have an analysis that I can give you, but that is a proposed estimated reduction of just under $12,000 a year if we did that change to billing.
So you want to talk a little bit about your department and what you do and your functions you serve?
So our major function is collecting taxes and revenue. I mean, that would be real estate, personal property, motor vehicle, and boats, and the tax liens, which we try and be fairly aggressive with the tax lien collection. We have increased collections for fiscal year 17. We collected a total of $452,000. 19 we collected $603,500. So we are making some headway there. Unfortunately, every year we add probably 20 to 25 new tax liens to that account. So right now we are at, it's just, including the interest, it's just over 6 million. But of that 6 million, 1.5 is actual tax. The rest of that is all interest and fees. So it grows, but we're trying. And we do have about a dozen properties that we've got in land court for foreclosure right now.
The department also processes payroll, sells beach stickers, and transfer station stickers, in addition to provides information to all the employees on benefit administration, and retirement, and then, of course, takes in all of the receipts for every department and accounts for all of those as well. We are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you,
Mr.
Carol,
Chairman?
thank you.
If I just may say at the outset, this might be an appropriate time for us to acknowledge the work of the finance team, and under the direction of the finance director. The books you have in front of you is a manifestation of the work that Carol does day in and day out, and it gets to the other goal that I talked about in the budget message, and that's transparency of information to filter through town meetings. So I would be remiss if I did not put that out there as you begin your line of questioning.
Great point, Joel. Well, thank you for all the work on this. Don, I'll start with you this time to,
Actually, pretty much what Joe had said. I'd go a little bit further. I mean, I'm very appreciative of Carol's contribution to where we are, because as far as I'm concerned, this is the best put-together budget I've seen in government here over the last 20 years. I mean, we got the books back, we got line items, we can drill down in things. We're not spending an extra 3 or 4 weeks with summary numbers trying to figure out what's behind them. There was a strategy, we kept to the strategy. There was a team, the team played together. So all in all, it was a dramatic change in the way we've done business this year, and I appreciate it.
Michael?
I couldn't agree more with Don. Thank you very much. Amy, just a quick question to you. The tax lien, the collections, how is the new attorney that we hired working out? Is she still working for us?
She is still working for us, yeah. So all of her fees get added. She sends me an itemized bill every month. So every one of her fees gets added to, the individual tax lien account. But she has really improved collections, I think. Yeah, we have a lot of payment plans that people are sticking to. She's the one that's filed, some of the foreclosures in land court, and several of those that she's filed have, come forth and paid. So she's doing a good job.
Is there a way to increase that, either with another attorney or with her firm?
Yeah, we add, as they drop off, we do give her more.
Okay.
So, yeah, we are increasing that.
And then out of the 1.4 million in taxes and the $6 million number, how many of those properties are owner unknowns?
Oh, owner unknowns. Donna and I do have, maybe a dozen owner unknowns in, for land of low value right now. So, let's see, and I don't think this is sorted by owner unknowns. I would say probably maybe 20,
Okay.
25.
And is that a large percentage of that 1.5 or 6 million? Not at all. Okay. Thank you.
Steve?
Just echoing sort of what Don and Mike said, but also I think more to encourage the people that are listening and those that are in the audience. Carol has led a real effort here on the transparency side, as Joe had said. And, if you're someone who is going to engage on town meeting floor or interact with the selectmen between now and town meeting, and you have questions and concerns about the budget, go online, take a look at what Carol has posted. It's very helpful. It's something that we haven't had in the past. And I think a lot of questions can be answered that you may have. And it may generate some other questions that you could contact this office and get some answers before people end up on town meeting floor without having the kind of answers they need in order to make intelligent statements about where the budget is. We want to be sure that as we all arrive on town meeting floor, one, we as a group are in agreement with each other and work as a team to present to everyone in the town where the financial condition of the town is in an honest and open way so that questions can be answered. So thanks again, Carol, because this is really, especially after last year's town meeting, it's hugely important that people are able to understand where we are, so.
Thank you, Steve. Jack?
Dale?
No questions, but thank you very much. This is excellent work.
I was very pleased to see that you included performance data in that statistical section. I think it's, it gives another indication of what's behind the numbers, which we usually see in a budget. But with the statistical data, you can see people delivering services, how many times they do it, what have you. So I commend you for that.
Tom?
Great job. Keep up the good work. The only thing, you know, Amy, as far as the owner's unknown, I'm glad that's starting to come to fruition, and we're actually starting to get something back from all this property that's just sitting around doing nothing. But thank you.
Angela?
Thank you also, but thank you for also coming to the Finance Committee meetings quite often and helping us out to keep on moving through all of this. It's helpful. Thank you.
John?
Hi, thanks, the Finance Department, Carol, Donna, and Amy. And the book has been tremendously helpful. This has been pointed out by numbers of members here. It's just a huge amount of information in there that I personally have to go to 2 or 3 times to really understand it, and then I meet with the department heads that help me even further understand it. And into Selectman Ford's comment, it really is important that we engage, if the public wants to be engaged, into this book. And it's a big book to read, a lot of numbers to understand, but to come to town to meeting fully engaged in the whole process of municipal balancing of budgets and putting together town budget will help tremendously. I've met with Amy and Donna and Carol a lot on these things. And Amy, you know what I'm going to ask here is on the uncollected property taxes, and to Mike, just to follow up on Mike's comments, is we have a $6 million, roughly $6 million uncollected property taxes, interest, penalties, and tax. Last year's was $5 million of interest, penalties, and tax. We've increased it $1 million in a year. About 2 or 3 years ago, this was brought up, I brought it up at that point too, and the selectmen at that point decided to print the names of delinquent taxpayers in the newspaper, I don't know if it was the Chronicle or whatever. And that just the printing of those names in that paper generated close to $400,000 of people, either they didn't know they were owing these taxes or whatever the reason, but $400,000 came in, pretty much unsolicited new taxes. And that's the cost of an ambulance. We're asking for an ambulance here. So that's one step that I think maybe we should entertain of doing again. Another step is taking it a step further and selling the debt that the town owes. There are companies out there that buy this debt at full market value of the debt, and they chase the delinquent taxpayers. I understand the reasoning, maybe not doing that. The fear of kicking folks out of their homes is a real fear. But the majority of these tax liens is on uncollected, owners unknown or property unknown addresses. So you're not kicking anybody out of anything, or it's land that the taxes owes on. So you're not kicking anybody out of a house. I just feel we should be a little bit more aggressive in the collection of these taxes to get these taxes collected. We're very high compared to other towns on the Cape as far as uncollected property taxes, and that's not a distinction I'd like to have. We have other great services and offerings to this town we can publicize other than that one. So again, I thank you both. I know you're all willing to do anything we ask and do anything to work on. And to Donna, you know, even though we had high assessments go up last year and property tax went up last year, it was almost a record. It is the last, I don't know, 5, 6 years. The abatements of coming in requesting for abatements has been low. So the anticipated stampede at the door really never happened. And I understand that you're working on resolving those 24 number of abatements out there. So I thank you for everything you ladies do. And this book is tremendous. I can't say enough about this book. And thank you, Carol.
Steve?
Yeah, just a quick comment on one of John's points. I would caution selling the debt. And the reason I say that to you is I was a financial advisor to a lot of cities and towns around the country, and a lot of the companies that are willing to step in your place are very aggressive, and a lot of really bad stuff comes out of it. So just a caution, there's a lot of companies out there that are interested in buying the debt for a very low number on the dollar, and they end up creating a lot of ill will within the town. So while I don't disagree that it's a potential, one of the solutions we might have in our toolbox, we need to be very cautious about that. So
It's full value that the town realizes.
in some cases, in others, not true. Not true. The town is willing to sell it for less. So because of the desperation that a lot of these municipalities have. Now, I will say that a lot of the towns that I dealt with were small towns throughout states like Pennsylvania and Ohio, desperate. Their budgets were in very bad condition. But again, even if it's at full value, a lot of what has taken place relative to how they treat the individuals they're pursuing is not a good situation. So I just would urge caution.
Oh, I agree. I'm not advocating doing it, but I think it's something we should look into and look at, like we're evaluating everything else here.
No, I agreed.
Ryan?
So I would echo the incredible job. I've read I got this 24 hours ago. I've read 173 pages twice in the past 24 hours. It's so impressive and so enormous to consume. I could probably read it one more time. I have 2 copies I'm flipping through. So, very fine job, and I have no questions for you.
I will tell you, thank you. I will tell you that the version of this that is online does not have the detail line items in it.
Right.
It's just too much information for people to download, to try to print. Also, in addition to that, I have line item comparisons for a 5-year period that I have prepared for you. If you prefer to see things that way, then I have copies of these for you here. I will apologize about the Munis report. That's our ERP system that we're trying to tweak. And I'll apologize, right up front to tell you that I don't know where that projected column comes from. I don't know how those percentages are calculated, but I will tell you all of the detail information with regard to departmental expenses, and the dollar amount of the proposed budget is correct. And we'll work with our provider, our software provider, to figure out that projected column that we cannot seem to get rid of.
Anything else, Judge? Thank you very much.
Thanks, ladies. Enjoy your day.
Next up is next up is Harvard, John.
That's gonna be me.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just advise, as you can see by the gentleman present, the agenda should have indicated harbor, waterways, and natural resources at this time.
Thank you, Joe. Heinz will recognize you then.
All right.
Otherwise, he'd be unknown.
That's fine with me. Good morning, John Rendon, Harbor Master. I believe you have the munis reports of our budget. I'll just briefly go through. My brief really was lined up in accordance with the questions that previous years we've been asked to provide answers to. Just a quick overview, our Harbor Master Department is staffed with 4 full-time people, and we have 3 seasonal positions that we utilize during the height of the summer. No staff increases are being proposed for FY21. And I'd just say, I think I got one of the greatest staff and people to work with. They do a terrific job. The scope of what we do in the Harbor Master Department, when you look at the number of people that we have, I think is tremendous, and it goes to the hard work of the staff that we have. And just in general, you know, priority one is maritime response. We maintain a 24/7 recall status, and you might ask how we do that. It's really, it's between myself and our deputy harbor master. One of us is always here. We coordinate. If I go out of town or if I go off Cape, I make sure he's here and vice versa. And then if on rare occasions we can't be here, we coordinate with our fire department and neighboring harbor masters to provide coverage. But I want to say that because it speaks volumes to Bill Neeser, who's our deputy, who is not really required to do that. You know, I mean, he's an hourly guy, and he does that because it's important to him and to our department. We enforce local and state boating laws and regulations and keep our expansive waterways properly marked and dredged. We have a lot of waterways in Harwich, as you know. Not only our three harbors, but all the Herring River, Round Cove, Pleasant Bay, Long Pond. I wish we could provide more patrol time on the water during the summer. I think it's needed, particularly Long Pond. It's a busy place, and I wish we could provide, and we do. I mean, we get out there at least a couple times a week. But if there's one thing, from my perspective, I wish we could be on the water more during the height of the season. But it's tough from a staff perspective. I know I don't want to personally get caught doing a patrol over at Pleasant Bay or Round Cove and then have a significant case that happens in Nantucket Sound. And so we balance that, and we try to hire seasonals that have boating experience. And so it's just a balancing act. Obviously, we manage and operate our municipal marina, 202 slip marina, that is occupied by recreational boaters, commercial boaters, charter boat captains, the commercial fleet, an island ferry. It's a busy place, and I think from a permitting standpoint, and from a slip assignment and transient dockage, I think the marina is very well managed, and I give a lot of credit to our waterways specialist, Michelle Morris, who, you know, you're going to see some of the revenue numbers, or you probably have in your packet, and we generate some good revenue from the marina, and we do so not only from our permitted slip holders, but a significant amount is from visitors. We call transient dockage. And we do that, we have designated dockage slips that are specific for that, but we also do a tremendous job of backfilling permitted slips to keep the marina at close to 100% occupancy. I think it's good for the public, it's good for the boater, and it's good for us from a revenue standpoint. We coordinate and schedule and provide operational support to dredging every year. We dredge in Harwich every year. And you know, one of the questions was, what's my top priority budget line item? I'd have to say every year I say dredging, because we do dredge every year, and when you have days like today or last night when it's blowing 50, 60 knots, it doesn't take much to close in or to make a waterway unpassable here in Harwich. And so I always have that. Do I use $150,000 every year to dredge? I'll come close this year. We're dredging Allen Harbor and Witchmere Channel. But I always need to be able to be in a position to clear a waterway if need be. And I think, you know, we rely on the county dredge right now. They do a tremendous job for us. But if I were in a position where I couldn't count on the county dredge and I had to bring in a private dredge company, it would be expensive. And so I have to, again, balance that. And then waterfront maintenance, you know, we have a lot of waterfront. We have a lot of landings, ramps, marina, and maintenance is part of it. And we heard some discussion about DPW and the help that they do at the harbors. They do a tremendous support of our harbors. I think you probably remember a couple of years ago when we centralized maintenance, we took about $8,000 from our budget to put towards the facility budget to help in that endeavor. But I will say, probably consistently, they go beyond that $8,000 that we provide, and they do a tremendous help. We just couldn't do all that we do with the staff that we have, and so that's much appreciated. If I go through the budget line item, I'll start with salary and wages. I'll start with our operating budget, not including salary and wages. We came in with a decrease from previous year of about 0.28%. Pretty much level funded. You know, our operating budget outside of salary, $252,580. And we had some decreases in budget items, utility. Telephone and data services, office supplies, vehicle supplies. Those were kind of the line items that we were able to decrease a bit. Some of the two line items that were increases had to do with water utility, and that really has to do with we have a now new irrigation system with our new landside renovations, and so we needed to increase our water utility by $1,000 to cover that. And then rubbish. We spent a lot of money taking trash out at the harbor. We have 2 dumpsters that we run, you know, throughout the summer. All winter long, but in the summer we're emptying that 4 times a week. And so it's costly, and plus the price has increased from the vendor, so we had to increase that. But beyond that, we pretty much are steady across the board in the rest of our operational line items. And then seasonal, salary and wages, again, no new hires or no increase in hours for staff. The increases that you see really are just having to do with union contract. 2% increase for our full-time staff. We had some additional longevity that kicked in for a couple of the staff members. But there's pretty much, you know, no increases in hours or people. I spoke to the top budget priority is our dredge money. If we look at revenue, I provided a comparison for you to look at that shows our revenue over the last 3 fiscal years, FY 17, 18, and 19. There was an increase of a total of $109,777 in revenue from 18 to 19. This was due in large part to the increases in seasonal and transient dockage, which was a result of the additional slips that we had as part of the marina upgrade. I think in FY 20, you'll see another significant increase, and much of that will be due to some of the landside elements of the landside project that is bringing additional revenues, such as the facility fee for the passenger boats, the snack shack leases, the artisan shack leases, winter winter boat storage leases. I think you're going to see another significant increase for FY 20 as well. We have no price increases anticipated for FY 21. I anticipate next year, FY 22, we'll look at proposing to the board an increase in dockage fees. That'll be essentially a 3-year, it'll be year 4, and I think it'll be time to look at that. The department has 2 receipts reserve funds. Account 1621, which holds our mooring fees and 50% boat excise tax. Amy talked a little bit about taxes. You know, we get pretty aggressive in collecting our boat excise tax because we realize half of that revenue comes to the harbor, and so, you know, we don't issue a permit if there's outstanding excise tax. So we're pretty successful at collecting those. And then Fund 1626 is the waterway user fee, which has a balance of about $272,000. Both accounts, 1621 and 1626, are utilized to pay debt service down on on some of our projects that we have. In addition to, I think, I've been working with Carol over the last year to try to make sure that the revenue, the increased revenue that I spoke about, I think if you look from FY17, when we first started our two major capital projects, to FY19, there's a $200,000 increase in revenue. I think you're probably going to see another $150,000 increase in revenue from FY20. So there's about $350, $360 in increased revenue since we started those two projects. And we are really dedicated, as was briefed and as was planned, that increased revenue, a good portion of that goes to, again, pay our debt service on those projects. So we're committed to that. We're working hard to try to make that happen. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
You want to go through this and come back to Heinz?
Yeah.
Or do it that way?
FinCom, any questions?
John? Who's due? Real quick then.
Tom?
Now, we're leasing property like down in Saquatucket for boat storage.
That's correct.
Is that coming to your department, or where's that money's going?
Well, I mean, it comes as a collection for us, but then it's going into.
Okay, 'cause I didn't see it in your grouping here, so I was just wondering where it was.
Let's see. So we have a parking lot lease, which is indicated, let me see if I'm looking at the right one. So Allen Harbor parking rental, that covers half of it, and then we also have the one for Robert B. Hour, and that will be in a FY20 because it hasn't, we haven't collected it yet. So we have always, over the last several years, rented to Allen Harbor Marine. This year, the board approved us to utilize Saquatucket, so you'll see that in FY20.
Thank you.
Sure.
Angel?
The sand that you had to dredge, the 150,000, were you able to sell some to various groups, or did you just have to give it all away?
Last year, we did not sell any sand. This year, when we do Allen Harbor and Witchmere, it's my hope that we'll be able to sell some. Last year, this past year, we did Allen Harbor and Round Cove, and we did not sell any. But, as I think everybody knows here, our priority is our public beaches first and foremost. And when you have tough winters, that's always, and you dredge 12,000 cubic yards of material or so, it doesn't take much to get on our beaches. So we did, I think last year we got a $30,000 grant from the state to dredge. So, that money went back into the general fund and covered a significant amount of our costs for that. So.
John?
I guess not. How was, now that the harbor's built, John, and everything's up and running, the snack shack's up and running, how was that? Just curious how that was received by the, not only the public of Harwich, but the public of the boating community in general. And you anticipate this year being even more successful as word gets out there through various boating magazines and advertisements that are saying Saquatucket is a place to go now?
Thanks for the question. I think it was very well received. I mean, I can't tell you how many people come to our doors and just are, really amazed at what we've done there, and they love the docks. The structure of the docks themselves. The concrete and the timber docks. I mean, you can see in our request for visitor dockage has increased significantly, and I think that's part of it. The snack shack, as you know, for a first year. They exceeded revenue projections, which meant they had to pay additional lease amount. I think, I think it was an additional $9,000 that they paid on top of the 20, I don't remember the number, 24, 26, that is the flat rate. But again, I think they're only going to grow, and I think it was very well received. And so, yeah, I think
Short-term
once
tie-ups.
word gets out, and it is getting out, I think we're just going to see more and more.
And the concessionaire, he was pleased with his,
He was.
obviously he was, if he has to pay more money, but, and how long's his lease? Just curious.
It's a 5-year lease with an option to, with the approval of the
Yeah.
board, for another 5 years.
No, it's a great operation you run down. Full disclosure, I have a slip down there, and the feedback I get is just tremendous. I think it's a great asset, and Carolyn Snack Shacks, I know, are adding a lot to it down there. I mean, Snack Shacks, excuse me,
The
Artisan
artisan.
Shacks.
And I think those, if you talk, I mean, we only had a short season last year. They started a little late just because they were new. But those things, I think, are going to grow. I mean, they're going to be really popular.
Yeah, no, I agree, and your revenue projections are continually increasing.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Sir.
Brian?
So I was just curious, because I couldn't find the number reflected, what kind of total revenue is coming from the Snack Shack and the artisan huts that you have? I know you had a partial year last year. What will you see this year? Because this is fiscal 19, so.
Yeah, so the total, I don't know what, I don't have off the top of my head how much the Snack Shack grossed, but from what revenue came in from the Snack Shack lease, it was about $35,000.
And then the artisans' revenue supplemental to that?
Carolyn, I don't know. Do you know?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can get it for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure off
Is
the
it
top of my head.
nominal? Is it just a nominal amount of money?
It's not a huge, yes, I mean, it's not a big item figure.
Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, quick question. The proposed budget shows a reduction in charges for services of $77,000. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I'm not sure. 77,000, I'm not sure where that's coming from.
From the funding, John, of your department's budget. I don't know if you have that sheet in front of you. It's just how your,
It's in the blue
how your,
book.
your department's funded.
Page 34 of the
That's a
overall
reduction.
budget.
On the,
Not on the Munex, it's on, in the blue book, the,
okay, I don't have that.
page 34 of the blue. Here, let me just, here.
I've
Let
got
me give this to you.
It's a combination of harbor and natural resources.
Right there.
You put sand in the machine? or-
Down. This is the funding. He brings in,
Is it just in general allocated to one specific
with the TA, just allocate.
reduction?
It
Charges
was-
for
It was
service.
charges for services.
Took out.
I don't know, Carol, can you help me out with that one?
So what is the question? I'm sorry.
He's asking about charges of services on our two departments, general fund, reduction in 77
I'm trying to
grand.
remember.
Going
do we
from
charge for
872,000 down
service?
to 795,000.
So in the current year budget, when the budget was proposed, it was to increase dredging to $150,000. That was the appropriation that was, I guess there was a plan in place and that, and in order to do that, there was $50,000 that was added as an anticipated revenue source for the sale of beach sand for FY '20. After speaking with the harbor master, we realized we didn't sell any in '19. We're not going to reach that $50,000 mark in '20. So, we need to reduce the revenue, estimated revenue, accordingly.
Okay.
And so that was mostly the reason why. In addition to that, the harbor master and I have been discussing where receipts are being how they're being recorded. And I have spoken with the town's legal counsel with regard to segregating revenue. So it was always the intent of the town to say increases in fees, they're associated with the harbor, are going to go to fund the debt. And the intent was always to segregate those increases in receipts in a receipts reserve for appropriation fund. And after drilling in on it with legal counsel, it was determined you can't do that. It's general fund revenue. So that whole discussion and compromise, I guess, if you will, came after this was prepared. So do I anticipate a recommendation for different projections for revenue to the board and the finance committee forthcoming during this process? Yes, I do. I expect to increase those revenues.
Thank you. But, so the lion's share of this is just for not selling sand?
Correct.
And I just don't quite understand why we have sale of sand as a line item, frankly, because, I mean, we'll sell sand if we can, but I don't think you can bank on that, you know, every year. I just, you know, there's a huge demand for it. I mean, if I could sell every year if I were to neglect some of our public beaches, but it's a tough
Yeah, well, it sounds like this
thing to
reflects a more conservative position. They're unwinding the sale of sand.
It's sellable, yeah.
It is, sir.
Michael?
I have nothing. Thank you, guys. Thank you, John.
Thanks.
Don?
I don't have, thank you.
Just a quick question. How do we compare, for example, with Chatham on our fees, dock fees?
Well, they don't have any slips, for
They don't?
one. All they have is moorings. And I think our mooring rates are a little higher than theirs. They're probably the cheapest in the state, I would guess.
Are we seeing more of the fishing fleet move toward us rather than stay in the Chatham Harbor because of all the issues they have with dredging and so forth?
Well, you know, every winter, much of the fleet comes and fishes out of Saquotucket, and I think it's great. It utilizes our marina. But during the summer months, you know, we just don't, we have wait lists that are
We don't have the
20 years
capacity.
long, you know, we just don't have the capacity. And we've tried to extend, you know, kind of the shoulder season for them and keep them as long as we can until our permanent guys start coming in June, you know. But, yeah, they have some tough waterways over there. You've probably read and know about all their dredging issues they're having, so.
Thanks, I'm not sure.
None for me. Thank you, John.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, there is a quick update from the finance director on an earlier question.
So there was a question proposed earlier about the artisan shack revenue for FY '20, and that was $5,000.
Thanks. Rich, you have a couple questions already?
Quick one. Thank you, John and Hines, for all of your work. Really appreciate that. Quick question, John. At last May's meeting, we raised funds for, I believe, a study on the Allen Harbor Jetty. I was just wondering when that might be reported on and what the status quickly of the study.
Sure, GEI Consulting is the engineering firm that's doing that study, and they have done some of their initial investigative work, and so it's in process. I think, you know, we'll probably get some ideas on what their recommended steps are within 3 to 4 months, I would say.
Richard?
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you. I just wondered if you could amplify a little bit, either Carol or you, John, on your accounts, where it says a portion of these funds are being used to pay debt service. That amount of money, which is $655,000 in those two accounts, is that replenished every year to those numbers? Could you explain a little bit how that's determined, of what portion of that large, those two funds are used for debt service? And does that number just keep growing and growing and growing?
Are you, Mr. Gunderson, you're talking about Fund 1626 and 1621, the two.
1621 and 26.
I can speak to how they're funded. Every year, we put all of our mooring fees, our mooring waitlist fees, and half of the boat excise tax into that fund every year. And then we have a separate fee, which is a waterway user fee, that every single boater in Harwich pays, whether you're on a private dock, a marina, commercial dock, or a town dock, or mooring. Anybody who's operating a boat in Harwich pays a user fee for that, and those funds go into 1626. And so every year, and if off the top of my head, waterway user fees are around $90,000 a year we collect, and then mooring fees are somewhere in the range of $120,000 that fund that every year. And then as far as how much of that goes to pay the debt service, I mean, I know we've been using Fund 1626 for the last 4 years to pay the debt on the Witchmere Pier. We did the Witchmere commercial pier a few years ago. Our portion after the 1.2 million that we got from the Seaport Council grant, our balance was almost $500,000. We've been paying that debt service out of 1626, and I think we have 1 more year left, maybe.
It's paid this year.
It's paid this year, so that'll be paid off, and then both funds will be, put towards the other projects.
Okay. If you have a book, a budget book, and you're interested to know the balances in those funds, and I can verbally tell them to you as well, you can turn to page 5. So page 5 shows you all of the funds that are being transferred into the operating budget to support the operating budget as a revenue source. The balance in the mooring fund as of December 31st was $318,132. The balance in the waterway user fee receipts reserved for appropriation fund at 12/31 was $300,591. We estimate annual revenues, just as the harbor master has explained, and then some of these funds go to support the debt for Saquatucket Harbor and Witchmere Pier currently. So I think at the end of the day, I've made an estimate of where I think that at the end of the fiscal year of '21, where the balance may be in those funds. And so for the mooring fund, it would be right under $300,000, I believe. And for the waterway user fee fund, it would be about $440,000. The intent has always been the goal, I guess, has always been for these funds to support up to 75% of the debt for the waterside project, for the design and the construction of the waterside project, which is different than the landside project, which includes the harbor master building, the snack shack, those artisan sheds. It was never intended for any of these funds to support that debt. Am I correct?
Correct. I mean, our focus was, the $7 million project, well, $6 million of debt, because, again, we got a grant, but for the water side.
Where can a resident get the book?
It's online.
Online?
It is.
At your website, accounts?
The town's website.
I believe it's on the front page.
Okay, thank you.
It'd be hard to find.
Okay, thank you, John. Hines?
Good morning. Heinz Froth, Natural Resources Director for the town. I recognize most of your voices and faces. In other years, my budget within the department has been lumped with some and others, and so Chris Clark has presented some of that. But I'd like to take a few moments to just describe some of the stuff that takes place within natural resources, and I'll highlight some of the things in the budget, even though it's pretty standard stuff for natural resources. Within Harwich, the natural resources that I kind of interact with and manage involve our freshwater ponds and river and embayments, where we have a pretty extensive water sampling program. Thankfully, we have volunteers within the town that assist me with this. We've had people, I'm starting my 23rd year in May, and I have people that sampled 20 years ago that still go out and sample these bodies of water for our town. Saves a lot of time, money, and energy to do so. We also have a water sampling program with the Pleasant Bay Alliance. So Round Cove is within our waters, as is some of Pleasant Bay. So I manage and oversee some of the water sampling groups there. As Natural Resources Director, I will respond to the algae blooms and fish kills that we have, or reports things on beaches and stuff like that. Also work with remediation projects like we recently had in Hinckley's Pond, so I work with that. As Shellfish Constable and Herring Warden, I'm responsible for things like that. So I'm out there patrolling shellfish flats with the assistance of 3 volunteers, unpaid, but also have been with us for 2 decades. Patrolling our herring run and making sure that's free of obstruction and debris, and making sure the fish passage is clear. And Harwich last year, through an electronic fish counter, had over 1.2 herring come up through our Herring River into the reservoir, and it was the largest in the state of Massachusetts. And so that's a good sign that we're getting a reestablishment of our herring populations. Eels are something else that I'm responsible for, helping with the migration of that, usually in the grassy pond. Recreational commercial shellfishing is strong in the sense that it's stayed consistent. You know, populations within shellfish, they're a little different than coins. You know, there are environmental factors that take place. We sell, through Natural Resources, approximately 400 permits a year. Most of that is recreational shellfishing due to the areas that are available, days of the week and certain things like that. There are a couple commercial shellfishermen that will shellfish in Herring River and Pleasant Bay and some of the deeper waters. To augment what Mother Nature has, the Natural Resources Department runs the Shellfish Lab down at Witchmere Harbor. It's a great asset to the town, not only to Natural Resources, but I'm able to hire a 3 high school students and a supervisor to help manage and run that lab. It runs from June through October, and we raise oysters and quahogs in that building, which then are planted in the field for recreational and commercial shellfishermen to harvest. Those that don't get harvested, hopefully they themselves reproduce and produce more shellfish. There's never enough shellfish, so anything that we can do in that regard to help survival and growth in the flats is a good thing. I say recently, it's been probably 5 years now, through Conservation Commission, sometimes docks and piers are assessed a mitigation fee for some of the disturbance they might incur in a waterway. And there's money set aside then that I can purchase additional shellfish then to replenish the body of water in which that was disturbed, so that's good, so we get a little bit of a bump sometimes with that. For a while, I was much more intimate with the our comprehensive wastewater management plan. A lot of water sampling data went into the creation of that, and decades worth of stuff there. I'm not so much involved in the daily operations now that it's gone into implementation phases, but sometimes I'm asked questions about that or some historical stuff perspective with that. I work with the Health Department, Conservation. As John mentioned, my office is down at the waterfront, and I rely heavily with the assistance. I mean, you're looking in a sense as an army of one, but I get a lot of help with, either the staff at the waterfront or volunteers that help out on the waterfront, water flats and things like that, water sampling. Within the job description, I also have some responsibilities as assistant harbor master, and that's really just to assist John and Billy with things that come up on a day-to-day basis across the counter or out on the water. So certainly trained and comfortable, dealing with any boating issues that we have. So sometimes you'll see me out there with my harbor hat on, towing somebody in or assisting in something like that. I answered the basic questions that generally come year to year within the budget. The biggest things, I think it was Mr. Howell mentioned, there are some small budgets that, there's not much you can get after in there, but the 2 biggest line items within Natural Resources in terms of operation are the acquisition of the shellfish seed. That $10,000 goes to the purchasing of quahogs and oysters within the lab. And then the other one is, I think it says professional services, but it is really our water sampling program, the analysis that we can't do within house. These would be the things like the nitrogen and phosphorus and chlorophyll, phaeophyte, and these are things that nutrients that we test for that go through the University of Massachusetts School of Marine Science, UMass Dartmouth. So it's the purchasing of that data that we need for our waterways that goes into, I don't know if you remember the acronym, the TMDL, total maximum daily load, nitrogen that can be absorbed in our waterways, which then translates into the comprehensive wastewater management plan. There's a small line of revenue within Harwich Natural Resources. It's the selling of shellfish permits. It's about $8,000 a year. We have different breakdowns. So it's interesting, we sell roughly the same number of permits, but when someone transitions from a resident of Harwich to a senior of Harwich, meaning 65 years, they're no longer paying $25 a year, it's $10 a year, which is, that's probably the best deal in town. We did raise our rates a couple years ago to do that. A non-resident is $65, and we sell a handful of those, and we have one-day permits too, because some people visit Cape Cod really once in a lifetime, and they want to experience that. So it's an avenue for the town to allow them to go shellfishing without having to purchase a year-round purchase because they're only here for a week. So we have one-day permits as well that we sell. So that's the really one item that draws in revenue. My budget is within, the percentages that were asked. Any increases were really the contracts for salary or longevity. I have those 3 high school students. I can tell you that for the 23 years that I've had the natural resources budget, money's been returned every single year. And so that's something that I'm proud of. I'll answer any other questions or expand upon anything that you'd like.
Okay. Thank you, Heinz.
Yeah.
I have a better deal. I have a neighbor who shellfish.
Oh.
And he gives me some, so that's better
Full
deal than
disclosure.
that. But, Steve?
Thank you.
Don? Michael?
No questions, thank you, Lance.
Oh, thanks. I'll turn over to you. No, I mean, good job. I don't have anything.
Brian?
I have no questions.
John?
Just a quick question, Heinz. Great job on the shellfish management area. You're looking at good things. That commercial shellfish thing in the Herring River, are they taxed like a regular commercial business? Do you know, or I'm just curious on how revenues derive for the town via
So,
that.
we knew are you referring to the Aquaculture Research
Yeah,
Corporation?
yeah.
Their upweller facility, it's a
Yeah.
privately run,
Yeah.
privately, other than, we get some of the shellfish from them,
Yeah.
it's a private operation, so it could be, selling guitars, in terms of the interaction, that it's no oversight that I know that the town
Okay.
has over
No,
that. But
can
they're very happy they're there,
Yes, I've heard,
and
yeah.
the nutrients that come out of Herring River, on a daily basis, they get good growth there. And part of the thing being at Witchmere Harbor and acquiring seed, how nice to be able to get from there than, let's say, in Maine. Those shellfish didn't have to travel, and they're coming from a different body of water, and it's a nice, quick run to get them into our upweller, which we raise in our lab.
No, it's just curious if, I guess that's an assessor's question, but
Yeah.
thank you.
Right. Tax.
Enzo?
No, thank you.
Tom?
No, I'm good, thank you very much.
Thank you, no.
Thank you.
Thanks,
I just
guys.
want to point out that our youngest son and Jessica Hewitt, who's his good friend,
Yep.
were in Heinz's program a number of years ago now.
Absolutely. I've had now over 50 kids at Harwich come through the lab, and it's just, I like to say, because they work really 8:30 to 11:30 when they're there, I usually say, by the time they go home, their friends are just getting up. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're running behind schedule, quite a bit behind schedule. So let me ask you to, this limit, let's take 10 minutes, grab a quick cup of coffee, and we'll start again.